If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. What's the most spine-chilling urban legend, local folklore, mythical creature, monster, story, or encounter from your hometown or state that still gives you goosebumps? Near my hometown, we have the 7 Gates of Hell, which are a set of 7 gates hidden in a wooden area around a rural road. Legend has it that if you pass all 7, that's a one-way ticket to hell. In the southwestern part of the county there is Remeyer's Hollow, where in the 1920s a witch doctor was murdered by a group of men who believed he was responsible for cursing one of them, and according to the legend, the ghost of the slain man still haunts the place. Across the river from my town is Chickies Rock, rumored to be a hotspot of unexplained activity, including a Bigfoot-like creature known as the Alba Witch. The disappearing logger. My town was founded in the mid-1800s as a logging community. One day, there was an accident. A logger got crushed by a tree. Not a completely unheard of event. Logging was a dangerous job back in the day. But when the tree was moved, the crushed log was never found. No blood, no clothes, nothing at all. The rest of the crew formed a search party, thinking that the missing logger must have panicked and fled into the woods. He was never found. Every once in a while, loggers get a weird feeling in those woods. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, it almost seems like the trees themselves are speaking to you. I'm telling you to come a little closer. Louisville has the legendary Pope Lick Monster. The Pope Lick Monster, more commonly, the Goat Man, is a legendary part man, part goat, and part sheep creature reported to live beneath a railroad trestle bridge over Pope Lick Creek in the Fisherville neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky, United States. Numerous urban legends exist about the creature's origins and the methods it employs to claim its victims. According to some accounts, the creature uses either hypnosis or voice mimicry to lure trespassers onto the trestle to meet their deaths before an oncoming train. Other stories claim the monster jumps down from the trestle onto the roofs of cars passing beneath it. Yet other legends tell that it attacks its victims with a blood-stained axe and that the very sight of the creature is so unsettling that those who see it while walking across the high trestle are driven to leap off. Other legends hold that the monster is a human-goat hybrid and that it was a circus freak who vowed revenge after being mistreated. In one version, it is said the monster escaped after a train derailed on the trestle. Another version commonly told by locals of the area claims that the monster is really the twisted reincarnated form of a farmer who sacrificed goats in exchange for satanic powers. The legends have turned the area into a site for legend tripping. There have been a number of deaths and accidents at the trestle since its construction, despite the presence of an 8-foot, 2.4 meters, fence to keep thrill seekers out. There is a common misconception that the trestle is abandoned and no longer used. In reality, the bridge carries a major rail artery into Louisville. Heavy freight trains cross the bridge several times daily, so it is easy for someone to get caught atop it while an oncoming train barrels down on them. Norfolk Southern Railway urged citizens not to climb the trestle, saying if caught, they would be arrested. Lots of stuff in Guyanese folklore. Baku, a small creature that is released upon the opening of old bottles, similar to a genie. When awakened, he hunts you down and throws stones at your windows. In the middle of the night. That's it. He lives off bananas and milk, and legend has it that if he is satisfied, he will answer any question you ask. Fun fact, in many rivers near Guyanese villages, there are a large number of bottles found discarded at the bottom. It turns out lots of the villagers threw out the bottles out of fear of these things. Moongazer, an extremely tall humanoid that only comes out at night. When he comes out, he goes into the middle of the forest and stares at the moon. Until dawn, when he disappears. That's it. He may also kill small children. These guys are especially creepy in Guyana, considering there are many tall trees around, and children often see a moongazer hiding among them. Old Higyu, this is a monster that, by day, disguises herself as an old lady and lives in your village. By night, she turns into a freaking ball of fire and devours newborn babies. According to legend, she was defeated by a group of children who set a trap under a newborn baby. They pour a gigantic handful of rice onto the baby. When the old Higyu flies in, she is forced to count the grains of rice for some unknown reason. If she loses count, she has to start over. She loses count frequently, and soon the dawn arrives, and all the children run in and beat her to death with broomsticks. Guyanese people are weird. Coming from 1, BTW. The Michigan Dog Man. A cryptozoological creature allegedly first reported in 1887 in Wexford County, Michigan. The creature is described as a 7-foot-tall, blue-eyed, or amber-eyed bipedal canine-like animal with the torso of a man and a fearsome howl that sounds like a human scream. According to legends, the Michigan Dog Man appears in a 10-year cycle. Sightings have been reported in several locations throughout Michigan, primarily in the northwestern quadrant of the Lower Peninsula. The first alleged encounter with the Michigan Dog Man occurred in 1887 in Wexford County, when two lumberjacks saw a creature that they described as having a man's body and a dog's head. It has also been spotted many times in the Upper Peninsula by locals. Horses that had died of fright were found nearby, surrounded by dog tracks. Paraná/Santa Catarina, Brazil. Here, we had some serious cases of chupacabra at the end of the 1990s. There is a book called Olhos de Drago, Dragon's Eyes, almost 500 pages of serious study of the phenomenon. The writer, at the time of the cases, investigated them in real time. So we got a lot of testimonies, photos, and accounts of the people involved. The amount of evidence and study is enormous. There is no doubt that it occurred, and no one could explain what the hell happened in those years. We got cases of 30 or more animals killed in one night, in a few hours, and left without any blood. The writer was even able to tape with a VHS camera a UFO flying above a farm where attacks had taken place the same night. He made a documentary, too. The attack stopped after some time, but we had the luck of having this man study the phenomena at the time. Serious stuff, not the nonsense speculative kind of material. The Sykesville Monster in Maryland has been sighted since the 1970s. The Sykesville Monster is a 7 to 8 foot tall, hairy humanoid. It is dark brown in color. Casts of the monster's footprints were taken, which are 13 inches long and 7 inches wide. Sightings of the Sykesville Monster began in 1972. It was sighted by a truck driver, who observed it sitting down before it got up and ran into the woods. The truck driver, who remained anonymous, said it could have been a man on stilts and seemed to be caked with mud from the waist down. In 1981, a man named Lon Strickler was fishing in the Patapsco River when he noticed a stray dog barking at a large clump of brush. Suddenly, a 7 to 8 foot long, hairy man emerged from the brush, causing the dog to attack. The creature fought back against the dog, which then ran away. After witnessing this, Strickler drove to a phone and called the police. While he was initially told to stay at the scene and wait, he was told to leave once the police officers arrived. He returned to the location hours later, noticing that the scene was taped off and several state and federal vehicles were in the area. Strickler tried to get answers from state officials for several days, but to no avail. He also contacted several news stations about the incident, who were at first interested but later did not want to talk. Sightings of the Sykesville Monster have also been seen in Woodstock and Marriottsville, Maryland. There's this road infamous to Colorado locals called Riverdale Road. The story goes that a jogger was hit by a car at the top of this one hill that has a pretty nice vista. The driver sped off, and today the jogger's ghost attacks motorists if they idle at the hilltop to appreciate the view. When I was just 16, a couple friends and I drove to that hill late at night. On the way there, we passed a sedan abandoned on the side of the road with its emergency lights flashing and headlights blazing brightly through the mist. All 4 doors were wide open, empty inside but for the white smoke billowing out. We slowed down, but we didn't see any people around. When we got to the top of the hill, we did as the urban legend says to do, we turned off our lights and waited. After a few silent, anticipatory moments, a truck hurtled past us like a big, clumsy dog. The headlights were dark. The truck slammed its brakes a few yards ahead, squealed its tires 180 degrees, and faced us. It was such a dark, menacing figure on the road. Our hearts plummeted. The truck's headlights ignited, startling us so much that we screamed bloody murder. Go, go, go. My friends were shrieking. As a new driver and an anxious person, I had difficulty turning around. Finally, I peeled out of there as fast as I could. The smoking sedan from before, with all its open doors, was gone without a trace on our race home. We were shouting, freaking out, and checking our rearview mirror for miles. We have 2 out where I live. The first is on this road called Pine Run Road. Basically, you can see shadows moving across the road. I saw them myself, and it basically looked like a shadow of a person in a walking motion that moves from one side of the woods on the side of the road to the other. When I saw it and the lights from my car hit it, it was like watching someone disappear into the tree itself, not around it, just straight in. Gave me goosebumps. The second story is about a ghost woman known to us as the Suskin Screamer, based on a back mountain road called Suskin Road. I admit I do not have the balls to do it, but the story is something like a woman was murdered here on her wedding day, and you can see her. The thing is, though, that in order to see her, you have to stop your car in the middle of the night or early morning, turn your car off, take your keys, and put them on the roof of your car. Then, when you look into your rearview mirror, you'll see her sitting in the back seat. Old green eyes on the Chickamauga battlefield. Either a demon creature or the ghost of a dead soldier, depending on who you ask, a disembodied pair of green eyes that stalk from the tree lines of the park and cause you to lose your nerve, or a tall female figure with white skin and long black hair, obviously the green eyes as well. It is said to have been seen feasting on corpses after the battle, which was one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. I grew up hearing about old green eyes, but everyone lost their nerve or had no idea when asked what it was. Everyone has a story of seeing them in the park or a friend who did, at least the old-timers do. From Houston, I know a few. There is the gargoyle of the Johnson Space Center. Back in the 80s, it was seen a few times by a member of the staff. It would lurk around the employee parking area and perch on the roofs of the buildings and in Rocket Park when all the rockets were still outside. It was blamed for a series of pet killings and the deaths of several NASA security German shepherds. Supposedly, when the employee got up enough nerve to report it, the administrators admitted they knew about it and had been keeping a file since the facility opened. There is the Haunted Library, considered the most haunted library in the U.S. The Julia Eidson building has been haunted by the old caretaker who died in the library's basement apartment in the 1930s. Apparently, his beloved dog also haunts the library, and they have been seen and heard for decades roaming the halls, playing his violin all hours of the evening. Murder Mansion. While this is a Seabrook legend, it's just as much a monstrous legend. Back in the 80s, a rich sociopath built a mansion in Seabrook. He was very active in the gay bar scene and preyed on young male prostitutes, whom he would give drugs and alcohol and invite back to his place. He quickly developed a bad reputation for being abusive and violent, and no one would have anything to do with him. So he started targeting runaways and kids with addictions. He collected a harem of boys and kept them in that mansion, locking them inside with him and refusing to let them leave. They finally had enough of his abuse and ended him, but he could not escape the building. They eventually wrote messages on the windows in paint. Legend has it was his blood, and the neighbors called the cops who got the kids out. The mansion sat empty for decades, with no one wanting to buy it. It was eventually bulldozed, and some condos were built on the spot. For nearly 100 years, Trinity and Galveston Bay had a 70-foot-long sea serpent that was seen off and on by sailors and beachgoers. It was last seen in 1908 in the Gulf by a steamship full of passengers before disappearing forever. The Houston Man-Bat. In the 1950s, almost 20 years before Mothman appeared in Point Pleasant, a very similar creature haunted the area around Bel Air Boulevard. Hilda Walker was hanging out on her porch with several friends when she realized that there was a man-like form that stood 6.5 feet tall and sported bat wings on its back lurking in one of the trees outside her home. It then became cloaked in a yellow light and beamed up into the sky. Other people soon started seeing the strange, glowing monster, which seemed to fixate on the Bel Air Theater for a time, before sightings dropped off. Maybe it moved to NASA or West Virginia. That's all I have. On Long Island, you get Lake Ronkonkoma. Ronkonkoma was the name of a Native American princess who fell in love with a white settler. Her father forbade the marriage. She ended up going into the middle of the lake and killing herself. For the past 200 years straight, at least one person has drowned in the lake each year, predominantly males. Legend has it that she is trying to find her soulmate, and she will lure you into the center of the lake if she so desires. The Tall Man is a tall, dark evil spirit that gets Native American teenagers to hang themselves. It goes after the weak, depressed, and usually drunk, so it's easier to get them to do it. Goes around the Native American communities, peeking in windows at night. The Black Dog of the Hanging Hills. Legend has it that a black dog wanders these mountains in Meriden, Connecticut, and if you come across him 3 times, you will meet your death shortly after the 3rd time. I've hiked these hills dozens of times and have yet to meet the doggo, but I always keep my eyes open. Rumors of people seeing it and dying pop up here and there. In the swamps in Louisiana, USA, there is a tale about a woman who crashed her horse or buggy into the swamp with her 2 children. This one really freaks me out. She walks the roads looking for her children and tries to get people to stop. The story is that if you stop, she will get in your car and kill you to take your children. Driving through that area one night when I was fully grown, I saw a woman with a long black dress on, but her face was all contorted and blurry, the only way I can think to describe it. It took my breath away and sent cold chills all over my body. We were a good hour into the swamp roads and hadn't even seen a gas station or a single car other than one about 30 or 45 minutes before on the opposite side. The swamp roads are separated, so between north and south, there is swamp on both sides. I didn't say anything because I couldn't talk. My son, about 4/5 at the time, screamed, "Did you see that lady? We need to help her," and I couldn't have been more terrified. My husband is from that area, but he was driving and didn't see her. He said only mothers and children usually see her, and he was not stopping for anything. We drove until we needed gas in the car, and we were far away in Erith. Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio. Here's the culmination of local folklore and legends I'm aware of. By far the most widespread is the Green Man, or Charlie No-Face. The tales say he's a green-hued man or ghost born from an electrical accident that stalks the roads of Beaver County, Pennsylvania, at night, short-circuiting cars and attacking the occupants. In reality, he was a guy named Ray Robinson who suffered horrific injuries when he was a child in the early 1900s. Most of his face was horribly burned and scarred when he touched trolley wires, trying to see into a bird's nest. He would walk the road connecting Wampum and Darlington at night and always wore a green jacket. Obviously, seeing him scared more than a few motorists. The second is the Pig Lady of Cannelton. Back in the late 1700s, on a farm near Darlington, in the old mining town of Cannelton, an 18-year-old woman came back home to her parents after spending some time in the South. She was supposedly married but came home without a husband. Her parents left her at home alone to go buy livestock in Pittsburgh, and when they returned in a week, she was nowhere to be found. Days went by, and a foul smell emanated through their home. They found her, headless, beneath the front porch floorboards. No one knows who killed her or why, let alone why they took her head. The legend says that if you walk the roads around Cannelton at night, you'll see a colonial woman wandering the fields. Sometimes she's without a head, other times she has a pig's head on her shoulders, hence the name. The third legend is the legend of Mary Black, one of the stories that gave rise to the Bloody Mary myth. She was an Irish immigrant who came over in 1832 and settled in Elwood City. Standard witch things while alive, sacrifice, Satan worship, etc., but most of it came from tales told in the 50s and 60s. The stories I'm aware of about her in life were that she was a bit eccentric and stern, but a nice woman well into her 80s. The legends say that if you say her name 3 times and then go to sleep, she'll crawl out of her grave and viciously claw at your face. After the story started circulating, people began vandalizing the graveyard where she and her family were buried. They absolutely destroyed it, to the point that city officials just left it abandoned, and her tombstone had to be taken by the local historic society just to keep it from being lost. It is disgusting what some people will do. After that, we have our fair share of haunted bridges. There's a bridge I crossed to go to work that is supposedly haunted by the ghost of a woman who was decapitated by a sign. You're supposed to stop the car and turn off your headlights around 1 a.m. and turn them back on, and she'll be standing in the middle of the road before either disappearing from view or jumping over the side of the bridge. Then there's the Summit Cut Bridge in Beaver County. It's just a small bridge over some train tracks. Legend says a woman drove her car over the side and died when her car hit the tracks. You're supposed to see a woman wearing a white dress wandering the road at night, and people see things on the bridge during the day. My cousins and I went ghost hunting one night when I was 12, and we saw the woman in white walking across the bridge and then disappearing before we even got to cross. We just turned around and went back the way we came. A few miles away from the Summit Cut Bridge, there's a road called Foxwood. I know people who say you're supposed to see a man in a blue flannel walking the road who will look back at you with glowing red eyes. People have been seeing him since the 1970s, at least. The legend of Hell's Hollow is from my hometown. My hometown was a major railroad stop in the mid-late 1800s. There was also a stagecoach line that ran through a patch of dense woods going through a hollow right outside of town. Bank coaches and travel coaches picking up money and rich travelers from the trains would get held up by a local gang of highwaymen that operated out of a cave in the hollow. Whatever they stole would be stashed underneath this big, ugly, gnarled oak tree called the Devil's Rocking Chair. Legend says anything placed under the tree was under the watch of the devil himself and could only be taken by the people who put it there. Anyone else was punished. Well, the sheriff of the next town over finally managed to catch one of the members of this little gang, and he told them everything about the hideout and the drop spot. He got himself a posse, and they went out to investigate the guy's claims. The sheriff went out to check the tree, and the rest went to the cave. When they reached the cave, however, there was nobody there and no sign it was being used. They waited for the deputy to return, but he hadn't by nightfall. They searched the area, including the tree, but found nothing. Not even the stolen goods. A year or so later, a hunter in the woods found a body lashed to the trunk of the big tree. It was just a skeleton by the time it was found, so no cause of death could actually be determined. The legend says the devil stayed true to the bargain. Florida. Every year we celebrate Gasparilla, which essentially is just Mardi Gras light, because, according to legend, Jose Gaspar, a local pirate, hung himself from his ship's anchor in Tampa Bay to avoid capture by the U.S. Navy. Another one I remember surrounded a killer in the 90s, dubbed the Hog Trail Murders. Apparently, The killer would lure young men into the woods and pay $100 to take their clothes off so he could take pictures of them. Then he would kill them. There were rumors that the woods were littered with Polaroid pictures. From the same town, there are rumored to be Northport devils. I think they're related to aliens or something. I don't know. There's a cult there that worships them and chases them or something. Northport is weird. Oh, and Northport claims to also have the Fountain of Youth. A lot of famous Spanish explorers did come to Northport, though, and even Ponce de Leon was mortally wounded down the street from my house. He had to be rushed to Cuba for medical treatment, where he died from his wounds. Maybe the Northport devils got him. I grew up hearing tales about the Maurice River mystery beast. According to local legend, in the early 80s, there was money to be made by raising and selling big cats, tigers, jaguars, etc. According to local police, who were most fond of this legend, a woman was arrested for having tigers, pumas, bobcats, etc., but when they went to round them all up, one was missing. The woman insisted that she had a black jaguar. The police found paperwork for it, but no cat. For years, people claimed to have seen a large black animal stalking their livestock or pets, but no cat was ever found. Snallygaster. In American folklore, the snallygaster is a bird-reptile chimera originating in the superstitions of early German immigrants, later combined with sensationalistic newspaper reports of the monster. Early sightings associate the snallygaster with Frederick County, Maryland, especially the areas of South Mountain and the Middletown Valley. 18th century, the area of Frederick County, Maryland, was settled by German immigrants beginning in the 1730s. Early accounts describe the community being terrorized by a monster called a schneller Geist, meaning quick ghost in German. The earliest incarnations of the creature mixed the half-bird features of a siren with the nightmarish features of demons and ghouls. The snallygaster was described as half-reptile, half-bird, having a metallic beak lined with razor-sharp teeth, occasionally alongside octopus-like tentacles. The snallygaster was rumored to swoop silently from the sky to pick up and carry off its victims. The earliest stories claim that this monster sucked the blood of its victims. 7-pointed stars, which reputedly kept the snallygaster at bay, can still be seen painted on local barns. Dueño, the Maryland Wolf Man. A wolf-like creature known as Dueño or Duayo is said to be hiding in the woods of Maryland. It is described as having features similar to a wolf, with dark fur over its entire body, a long bushy tail, and a dog-like nose. However, it stands like a human and uses its forelegs like arms. It is said to be about 6 feet tall. According to legend, Dueño is the mortal enemy of the snallygaster, another area cryptid described as a flying, blood-sucking reptile sighted in the Maryland Blue Ridge Mountains. Their vicious encounters reportedly date back to the early settlement of the Middletown Valley. The first mention of the name Dueño comes from a 1944 sighting in West Middleton, Frederick County, Maryland. Witnesses heard the creature make frightful screams, and footprints attest to the sighting's claims. However, the tale did not come to prominence until a newspaper account in the Frederick News Post on November 27, 1965, was published and detailed an account of the creature. Near the woods of Gambrel State Park, John Becker went out in his yard to investigate a strange noise. It was getting dark, and he had started back to the house when he saw something moving toward him. It was as big as a bear, had long black hair and a bushy tail, and growled like a wolf or a dog in anger. As it got closer, it stood up on its hind legs and attacked him. Becker fought the creature until it ran into the woods, leaving him, his wife, and his children in horror. Deciding to remain anonymous under the alias John Becker, he filed a report with local state police, telling of an attack by a mysterious monster that he called a Dueño. Soon, more stories followed in area newspapers, spawning a rash of calls and letters to the newspapers. Other sightings were reported in nearby areas. However, by mid-December, the story started to fade. In the summer of 1966, the creature was again sighted on the outskirts of Gambrel State Park when a man only referred to as Jim A. encountered the Dueño as he was heading toward a campsite. He described it as a shaggy, two-legged animal the size of a deer with a triangle-shaped head and pointed ears and chin. It was dark brown in color, and when it approached, it made a horrid scream and backed away from the man. Jim went on to say that the creature had an odd walk as it retreated. Its legs stuck out from the side of the trunk of the body, making its movements appear almost spider-like as it backed away. In the fall of 1976, another sighting of the Dueño occurred in Frederick County near Thurmont when two men were driving off Route 77 onto a private road. They saw a large creature run across the road in front of their car. They described it as follows. At least 6 feet tall, but inclined forward since it was moving quickly. Its head was fairly large and similar to the profile of a wolf. The body was covered in brown or brindle-colored fur, but the lower half had a striped pattern of noticeable darker and lighter banding. The forelegs were slimmer and held out in front as it moved. The back legs were very muscled and thick, similar to perhaps a kangaroo. This was not a hominid-type creature. It did not have the characteristics of an ape. It was much more similar to a wolf or ferocious dog. However, it was definitely moving upright and appeared to be adapted for that type of mobility. I was particularly impressed by the size and strength of the back legs, the stripes on the lower half of the body, and the canine wolf-like head. Later, in 1978, 2 park rangers were near the Cunningham Falls area when they encountered a large, hairy creature running on 2 legs. More than 2 centuries ago, another such creature was told of in folklore, that of the Hexen wolf. In the late 18th century, the Pennsylvania Dutch began settling in Carroll, Frederick, and Washington counties of Maryland. Almost immediately, stories began to circulate about a wolf-like creature. Its description was similar to that of the dueño, a mammalian biped with features similar to those of a wolf but with the stance and stature of a human. The legend of the Hexen wolf had long been known to inhabit tracts of land across much of eastern Pennsylvania and was told in German folklore. Poolesville, Maryland. Martin Lamar. During the Civil War, there was this guy, Martin Lamar, who lived on the banks of the Potomac and the C&O. He lived in Virginia and would hop to the Maryland side for weeks at a time to go hunting and fishing. When the war broke out, he was on the northern side and got taken to Pennsylvania to get drafted while his little brother joined the Confederates. Anyway, Martin goes and fights, tries to find his brother, and keeps him safe. At Antietam, he gets wounded and learns from wounded Confederates that his brother was killed. He freaks out and heads back to the river, stealing uniforms from both sides along the way. Then every night he would sneak out, go up the river to either side's camp, and drag sleeping soldiers out of their tents to kill them. This went on and killed morale for everyone, so the Union had a bounty put out on his head. Lamar kept up his revenge as long as he could before the soldiers eventually flushed him out and hung him. Supposedly, he died cursing all those involved in the war and swearing vengeance from beyond the grave. These days, they say his ghost still shows up to pull people out of their tents to kill them, but won't hurt you if you sleep outside. So, one time I was sharing a tent with my friend in Great Falls on this really quiet night when I woke up to the sound of him screaming his lungs out outside. The zipper was still closed, and I found him way outside the campground by the water, in his sleeping bag with the hole tied shut and no footsteps or drag marks anywhere. Creepy as hell. I have 2. The first one is Sarah Norton. Our town, Antioch, California, was founded by a coal mining operation and was experiencing a huge boom. Sarah Norton was a midwife and was killed in a horrible carriage accident. Every time the townspeople attempted a burial, it was hit with a huge storm that prevented it. There are a few variations on her death, however, with the carriage being the main one and the second being that she was killed as a witch since 2 girls she cared for died. Little known facts: Rose Hill Cemetery was moved, the exact location is known to very few. Her actual grave location is also unknown. The second most famous is the Gates of Hell. People claim they sit at the end of Empire Mine Road, however, according to my father and one of my grandfathers, it does not. They took me to the actual location when I was in high school. The actual gates lead to the building itself, an insane asylum that was abandoned. Rumor has it that the doctors and nurses experimented on patients and whatnot. I actually had a relative that was killed there, though the earthquake of 1906, I think, destroyed those records due to fire. I have been to both, Rose Hill Cemetery especially, numerous times and have had experiences I could not easily explain. I live and have lived for most of my life in the small town of Mechanicsville, Virginia, about 10 miles north of the lovely city of Richmond. Mechanicsville used to be a rural town, but it's expanding rapidly. When I was growing up, the nearby super malls and chic shopping centers were all farmland. Studley Road is a curving country road that runs east from State Route 301, winding its way past the few small schools in the area, diving in and out of the cool, shady woods on summer days, with small houses and fields when the woods gave way. In one of those small houses by one of those fields, a little girl lived, raised by her mother and father, an only child. Like all small towns, Mechanicsville has its share of delinquent residents, and her father was one of them. Essentially, the town is drunk. Legend has it that one night he got drunk and a fight broke out, which ended in his wife and daughter being killed and then his own life being ended with a gun. Apparently, the little unknown to him ended up surviving for a bit. Unable to use the phone and with no neighbors nearby, she made her way down Old Studley Road, the blood dripping down the front of her nightgown. She never found her way and apparently died by the side of that old road that fateful night. Legend has it that in one of those shady, Cool turns into the woods. On certain nights, you can see the little girl walking slowly down the road to her neighbors or the hospital nearby to get the help she needs. It is said that she always appears to be facing away from the spectators. The fateful few who have pulled over to help her supposedly report that, upon shouting, they get no response. Approaching closer leads to her suddenly turning around and releasing her jaw, letting out a blood-curdling scream and gurgle from her broken face. The legend is called the Studley Girl and has terrified me on late-night trips to or from my friends' houses throughout my teenage years and beyond. There's a small town about 20 minutes from mine called St. Thomas, which is located in Ontario. You know what they say about small towns? Small towns are full of urban legends and spooky stories. In my case, this is true. When I was about 11, my dad and grandma, who also happened to share my fascination with the paranormal, took my sister and me out to the witch's grave. The grave itself is almost impossible to read due to the aging of the stone. My grandmother began to explain the legend. I sat shivering in the back of the car, refusing to get out. I could feel the evil energy around me. The legend starts, as many do. There was a woman who lived in town. An odd woman. The townspeople had their suspicions and turned against her. Nobody ever really knew why they decided she was a witch. After they killed her, they buried her in a small cemetery behind the town church in order to keep her evil energy at bay from the rest of the town, kept surrounded by a holy place. Around the grave, there are 4 pillars. The grave and pillars are now black, but the legend says they were originally white, and the witch's energy changed the color. At night, the pillars supposedly turn white again. The part of the legend that scared me the most as a kid was the curse the witch laid on her grave. If you go beyond the 4 pillars, you will die in 5 years. I remember my dad pretending to go between them, and I was crying and yelling for him not to. A black cat then came over and pawed at him to leave. This is also part of the legend. A black cat protects the grave, ensuring those who are foolish enough to go near it do not go into the pillars. Thankfully, my dad never went between them. Later, my grandma brought one of her close friends there who was not a believer. I didn't know this until the other day, when my grandma brought it up to me, but she stepped between the pillars, and she died a few years ago now. 5 years after it happened, I don't know if the legend of the witch is true. I'm sure some things have been twisted over the years. All I know is that there's some hocus pocus shit going on here, and nobody talks about it. When I was a child, my grandmother told me stories of nearby mountains being haunted. It is actually more of a hill than a mountain. It is known locally as Milksick Mountain. A local rumor has it that Milksick Mountain got its name from the fact that, in the old days, you couldn't keep milk there. People would buy their milk and take it home with them, and the next morning it would be bad. Later, when I was older, I heard stories of the Milksick Monster, a beast that haunted the slopes of Milksick Mountain and resembled a cross between a Bigfoot and a wolverine. To this very day, people sometimes claim to hear the screams of the Milksick Monster. Of all the out-of-the-way places in this area, none have a reputation for strange occurrences like Milksick Mountain. Cars that mysteriously refuse to start, radios that won't work, and flashlights with new batteries that go dead. At least twice when I was a teenager out running the road as kids with a car and too much time on their hands will do, I drove to the top of Milksick Mountain, and when I got ready to leave, nothing. Turn the key, click, no lights, nothing, as though the battery were dead. Both times I had someone with me, and we got out and pushed the car around until we could get in it and coast all the way to the bottom. Both times, when I reached the bottom of the hill, the car started right back up. A few years ago, I was on top of Milksick Mountain with a GPS unit. It would never settle down to a stable reading. The GPS coordinate display jumped around wildly and randomly showed me traveling across the ground at 30, 40, or even 50 miles per hour. Readings taken over an hour varied by up to 1,000 feet. I dove to the bottom, and boom, the GPS unit worked perfectly. Kentucky. The Bell Witch. It is a fairly interesting story, even if you disregard some of the silly stuff people from around the area will tell you. The Bell Witch or Bell Witch haunting is a legend from southern United States folklore, centered on the 19th century Bell family of northwest Robertson County, Tennessee. Farmer John Bell Sr. resided with his family along the Red River in an area currently near the town of Adams. According to legend, from 1817 to 1821, his family and the local area came under attack by a mostly invisible entity that was able to speak, affect the physical environment, and shapeshift. Some accounts record the spirit as also being clairvoyant and capable of crossing long distances with superhuman speed, or of being in more than one place at a time. In 1894, newspaper editor Martin V. Ingram published his authenticated history of the Bell Witch. The book is widely regarded as the first full-length record of the legend and a primary source for subsequent treatments. The individuals recorded in the work were known historical personalities. In modern times, some skeptics have regarded Ingram's efforts as a work of historical fiction or fraud. Other researchers consider Ingram's work a nascent folklore study and an accurate reflection of belief in the region during the 19th century. While not a fundamental element of the original recorded legend, the Bell Witch Cave in the 20th century became a source of continuing interest, belief, and the generation of lore. Contemporary artistic interpretations, such as in film and music, have expanded the reach of the legend beyond the regional confines of the southern United States. The Omega Men of Nyack, New York. They are a group that haunts the woods of upstate New York. They have their meetings in an abandoned military facility. If a missing person case leads to the woods around Clausland Mountain, the police just abandon it, knowing that the Omega Men have made another sacrifice to their demon god. There are stories of murders, run-ins with the mafia, supernatural encounters, and all kinds of creepy stuff. There's a Christian college in town. My wife went there and told stories about some of her classmates being secret members of the satanic group. On a hike with a boyfriend, they discovered strange etchings on the rocks and evidence of fires inside the old military base. On some blogs I've found, it's believed that the group was started in the 80s by some do-gooder Christian college kids. Since then, anything weird or spooky in Nyack has been attributed to this benevolent group from years past. I guess because their name was known but their activities were not widely known. The campfire has added a lot to the stories of the Omega Men, but it's all in good fun. Growing up in Bangor, California, I always heard the same ghost story. It became a sort of urban legend for our town of 665 people. From 2006 to 2009, our fire station was haunted. The firefighters all insisted on the presence of a wailing spirit. It would lock the firefighters in rooms alone and screech a deafening sound at the helpless workers. This lasted for years until the station workers refused to ever enter a room alone, as that is when it usually struck. In 2009, the station was shut down, and ever since, the Bangor Banshee has been heard in our hills at night. Being a local, having lived in Bangor my whole life, I had long since ignored this spirit as a tall tale, that is, until a couple of months ago. I was at a friend's house a town over and found myself driving home at 2 a.m. alone down our unlit highway. It being the start of summer, and my old Honda lacing air conditioning, I left my windows open for the drive. That's when I heard it. A scream doesn't quite sum up my feeling. It sounded so loud and inconstant, like 100 simultaneous blood-curdling screams. Behind, in front, and all around me, I believe I saw a dark figure on the side of the road in the corner of my eye, but I was so disoriented by the noise that my mind may have tricked me. In a moment of panic, I slammed the gas, and the sound dissipated after a few moments. I haven't driven on that road at night since, and I still get an eerie feeling on my commute to work each morning. A few towns away from mine, there is a place called Brent's Lake. It's on a long, narrow gravel road in the middle of nowhere. The story behind the place is this: there was an old man who owned the road named Brent's. Somewhere throughout history, the spelling was changed. Brent's was an alcoholic who owned slaves and was really mean to his wife. Rumor has it that he would murder and bury his tenants in his backyard and even do the same to his wife. Brent's later died from a cold or something like that, and many people say that he haunts the lake. It's not just him that haunts that place. There is a hanging man tree at the lake itself, and there's even a spot of dirt, no matter how deep you dig, it appears burned, where people say that witchcraft was practiced back in the day. So when I heard all of this, my 16-year-old self just had to go explore. We arrived around midnight one night, and when we got there, we pulled down the road and towards the boat ramp. When I stepped out of the truck, I got chills all over, which was strange because it was a dead summer at 100 degrees. As I walked towards the lake, I heard the gravel kick up behind me. I assumed that it was my then boyfriend, so I didn't pay much attention to it until I heard it. Suddenly, I heard the footsteps stop, and I heard a horse neigh and literally felt its breath on the back of my neck. I slowly turned around and saw nothing there. I turned back around and was going to walk back down the boat ramp to the water. That's when I heard the footsteps again, but this time something pushed me. It pushed me so hard that I practically flew into the lake. My second time going to Brent's Lake didn't last as long as my first time, but it was definitely more terrifying. Me and my dad decided to drive out one morning around 10 a.m. We arrived around 10:35 or so, and as we pulled towards the lake, the car died. We thought it was strange but didn't think much of it. We got out of the car and walked to the lake, which was about a 10-minute walk. We stood at the water for no longer than a minute and heard a scream. It sounded so much like a woman screaming for help, but remember the panther the state let loose a few years prior? Me and my dad decided to just walk back to the car before we ran into it. All in all, we were gone from the car for no longer than 35 minutes. When we finally got the car to turn back on, which took another 10 minutes, we headed back towards the house. We were about halfway home when my mom called and asked us when we were coming back. I told her we hadn't been gone long, but we should be home in just a minute. That's when she told me that we had been gone for over 4 hours. I didn't believe her because the clock on the car radio read 11:35. I hung up with my mom and looked at the time on my phone, and sure enough, the time on my phone read 2:48 p.m. to this day. Me and my dad have no idea how we lost 4 hours of our lives when we were only gone for about an hour and a half. That was the last time I went to Brents Lake, and I honestly don't think I will ever go back. So if you're ever around the border of Marshall and Benton counties in northern Mississippi, do not go to Brents Lake. That lake is in a place that is not ours. The lake no longer, if it ever did, belongs to humans. Brents Lake is a place for the undead and the lost, and to humans, it's extremely dangerous. We have a bunch. We are an old railroading town, so there is a lot of history here. My two favorites are the Ice House and Dodge Hill Cemetery. The Ice House was an old abandoned ice house that was where they stored the ice for people's ice boxes. It was also rumored to be an asylum at one point, though I have not been able to find any evidence of that. There was also a graveyard out back, but to my knowledge, that is also false. The rumors were that if you went out there at night, there was a different feeling the minute you crossed the fence. The air turned cold enough to see your breath in. Once near the ice house, sounds started to creep out of the house. You could hear people talking. If you went inside, there were large hooks and hoists for the ice. Occasionally, you could see a man hanging from the hook. You could also hear people walking around upstairs. They eventually tore down the building and put a gravel pit there. I think they were tired of teenagers running around the property. The other is Dodge Hill Cemetery. It's located a few miles outside of town. If you go out at night and shine your headlights on the Jesus statue, its head will turn. Others say the Virgin Mary statue will start weeping tears of blood. The weirdest part of this legend is the animals. Several people have reported seeing animal spirits out there. There have been numerous reports of people hitting animals on the road near there, only to drive through the animal instead of actually hitting it. It wasn't a specific urban legend about my hometown so much as a general urban legend. The legend is derived from late medieval legends where people journeyed through a forest and found a forgotten village the forest grew up around. The only surviving building is a stone church where the last of the villagers gathered before the Black Plague wiped them out 100 years earlier. The travelers find their skeletons still seated around the altar. In the case of my town, we're surrounded by steep, high hills. Hikers found a car that ran off the road with a woman's skeleton in the driver's seat. She was reported missing in the 1970s, but with her car gone and no internet or cell phones, authorities concluded she simply drove away. Which she kind of did, but she ran off the road, crashed in the deep underbrush, and nobody found her until years later. There are similar stories in other places, but mostly about cars that crashed into ponds and came out looking like what a car submerged for 20 plus years looks like. Her car and her personal effects were mostly intact, basically, a 1970s time capsule. There's a road by my high school where a brother and sister crashed in the 1970s. They hit a tree, the passenger side was against the tree, and the car caught fire. She died when the driver's side door melted shut, and the brother's arms, I've met him, the family is prominent in the community, were horribly burned from trying to pry his sister out. People had to pull him away from the car, he almost died trying to get her out. My old science teacher, who retired as of '09 and was young at the time, lives across from the site and was the one to call the police. He told us he still dreams about her screams. Anyway, since then, there have been several crashes on that road, which is a straight, non-winding road, 2 of them into the same tree that the original car veered into. The odd thing is that most of the accidents that have happened there have resulted in deaths. I've heard between 10 and 15 over the years. This is a tiny town, and this is within the same mile. That much is true. I've known of 6 accidents and 4 deaths, though 2 were in one car. In my lifetime, I've been living there since 1996. They were all within a mile of the tree, which is marred by all the accidents. The urban legend is that sometimes if you drive past the tree at 12:13 a.m., the reported crash time, you'll see something in the distance down the road. It looks like a single approaching headlight, but if you go toward it, there won't be a car. It's the burning girl, trying to get back to her brother. An extension of this is that you can feel your arms burning when you see her. I have friends who swear they've seen the burning girl, but not the arms part. Black dogs and phantom hounds. Legends of black dogs and phantom hounds are widespread throughout the Chesapeake Bay region, which was one of the earliest areas settled by the English. The tales of British black dogs were combined with werewolf traditions and typical ghost stories, as well as possibly with cryptozoological sightings of weird creatures, to create a tradition that is like the British ones and yet unlike them at the same time. Black Dogs of Warfieldsburg. The tiny village of Warfieldsburg in Carroll County is haunted by a black dog. Recounted by Maryland folklorists Annie W. Whitney and Caroline C. Bullock, it is the story of two men who were riding along near the Ormine Bridge at dusk around 1887. They saw a large black dog that passed through a fence, crossed the road, and passed through another fence. Whitney and Bullock also recount the tale of a man who stood under a tree near a bridge, possibly the Ormine Bridge, because he was told a phantom black dog would come by. The dog appeared, and according to him, the dog followed him for a brief time before vanishing. Yet another instance was of a man who saw a black dog dragging a length of chain. This black dog can apparently never appear more than once to the same person, and it is said that the crack of a whip near it will cause it to vanish. In some variants of the story, the dog is the phantom of Lee Masters, a notorious Carroll County landowner who was supposedly quite cruel. Masters is also associated with the haunting of Avondale, his manor house. There was a case in 1975 in which a group of motorists supposedly struck a large black dog standing on a road near Warfieldsburg. They felt the impact of the strike and felt the animal under the wheels, but when the car passed by, the black dog was standing in the road, baring its teeth at them before vanishing. Blue Dog of Rose Hill. One perhaps the oldest ghost story in Maryland is that of the Blue Dog of Rose Hill. Near the town of Port Tobacco, Charles County, there is a rock covered in reddish discolorations. Called Peddler's Rock, it supposedly marks the spot where a trader was killed at some point in the latter part of the 1700s. In true ghost story fashion, there are many variants of the tale. Some have it that the body was found lying on the rock, and some have it that the body was buried. Some have it that the victim was not a traitor but a returning Civil War soldier. In any case, the man's money was left behind, and his dog, a great blue-tinged mastiff, almost black, was killed during the murder. After the crime, the men returned to seize the treasure, were warded off by howling, and were charged by a large, luminous dog. During the Civil War, men under the command of General Joseph Hooker supposedly tried to retrieve the peddler's treasure but were, like the murderers, frightened away by howling and the approach of a large hound. I don't know of any confirmation of this story, but in the early 1860s General Hooker was, indeed, engaged in maneuvers around Washington, D.C. The number of camp followers attached to Hooker's army, by the way, were the source of hooker, a common slang term for prostitute. As recently as February of 1971, locals claimed to hear the howling of the dog coming from the vicinity of the rock. Blue Dog of Rose Hill. Too, it could be just another variant of an urban legend or a wholly separate story, but the city of Frederick County, has its own Blue Dog of Rose Hill. The grounds of Rose Hill Manor off Route 355 in the northern part of the city are also haunted by a phantom blue dog. This blue dog was the pet of a previous owner of the manor. The owner had buried treasure 6 feet from the old oak tree on the property. The ghostly dog appears at midnight, wanders the grounds, and vanishes as mysteriously as it appeared. Now deceased Maryland researcher Mark Korvinsky of Strange Magazine investigated the tales of the Frederick Blue Dog. Snarly Yow. Snarly Yow is the name given to a phantom hound that haunted a section of the National Pike near Turner's Gap, Frederick County. The hound was first mentioned by Madeline V. Dahlgren in 1882. Her book, South Mountain Magic, details no less than a dozen sightings of the beast. One account is from Daniel Messick, whose father kicked at a huge dog near Dame's Quarter. His foot passed directly through it. Sticks, rocks, and even bullets were recorded as having passed through the beast in Dahlgren's accounts. Other accounts have stated that the dog left physical traces and frightened horses to the extent that they threw their riders. The dog was seen numerous times by a minister at a small church in Glendale. A staple of Frederick County legendary for years, the Yow was seen in 1962 near Zittlestown. In this instance, it was headless, white, and had a drug chain behind it. The South Mountain area is also the traditional home of a number of werewolves. Bullbeggar Creek. It isn't technically in Maryland or Delaware, but in the northern portion of the Small Finger of Virginia on the Delmarva Peninsula is a feature called Bullbeggar Creek. There is also a nearby village called Bullbeggar. British readers will be familiar with the term, which referred to a phantom or goblin that haunted several regions across the island. Traditions do exist in Virginia of free-roaming humanoid phantoms that change into black dogs, but I can't place those traditions geographically and can't say definitively whether this accounts for Bullbeggar Creek's name. It is certainly an odd name, however. I wouldn't doubt there is some sort of tradition around there, as can be seen from the above cases, The phantom hounds found in this region of the eastern United States are both similar to and different from the British cases. Chain dragging seems to be a fairly common feature of the accounts, as it is in the cases of the Guy Trash and other English hounds. Only the dog haunting Warfieldsburg is reputed to follow individuals, as is common in British lore. Another common feature of the stories, also common to Pennsylvania lore, as will be discussed later, is a clearly phantasmal nature, and in several of the instances, the dog is clearly defined as the phantom of a specific individual. An interesting facet of the case is that the dog traditions seem to for the most part die off in the 1970s, the late 1960s and 1970s being the timeframe that Bigfoot sightings began in earnest in Maryland. Also interesting is that some sightings, particularly of Frederick County's Duello in 1973, do have a rather canine cast to their features. One wonders whether some of what are reported as Bigfoot sightings are actually sightings of black dogs. When I was growing up in Jersey, my favorite story was, and still is, the legend of the Jersey Devil. Pregnant with her 13th child, Mother Leeds cursed the baby, and when it was born, it changed into a devil and flew up the chimney and into the Pine Barrens, where you can hear it singing to this day. In some versions, he eats either Mrs. Leeds or the midwife before flying off, but I do like to say that I believe he's out there, just a misunderstood creature looking for a family, or that's how I'm writing it in my comic anyway. Hey! Truly, I think it's the mob that keeps it alive, because the real reason you don't go in the Pine Barrens at night or really at all is because that's where the mob whacks people. A bunch of bodies in there. I don't want any of that. Ozark Howler. The Ozark Howler, also known as the Ozark Black Howler, is a legendary creature that is purported to live in remote areas in Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas. The Ozark Howler got his name from the residents and hunters. It is said to roam the remote parts of the Ozark Mountains. The reports originate from a vast area that includes parts of Arkansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. The witnesses describe Ozark Howler as a bear-sized creature with a thick body, stocky legs, black shaggy hair, a goat-like beard, glowing red eyes, and prominent horns protruding out of its head. The creature also has a tail, but one of the many things witnesses can't agree on is whether it has a short tail or a long tail. Howl. The most distinctive feature of the Ozark Howler is its unusual cry. Far more people have claimed to have heard the Ozark Howler than to have seen it. It's agreed upon by all witnesses that the creature has a terrifying howl, but what this howl sounds like varies wildly, perhaps even more so than its physical description. Its cry is often described as being a combination of a wolf's howl and an elk's bugle. Witnesses have also described it as being similar to a hyena's laugh. The mysteries of the Ozarks are part of their charm. Folk tales of ghosts, monsters, and strange creatures in the region date back hundreds of years. Unlike the well-known Arkansas wild man of the 19th century and the Boggy Creek and White River monsters of the 20th, the Ozark Howler mystery is complicated because eyewitnesses vary widely in their descriptions of what they have seen. The origins of the Ozark Howler legend aren't very clear. Some sources claim that there have been sightings as far back as the early 1800s. In the 1950s, there was a supposed sighting where a black, goat-like creature was described as being the Ozark Howler, despite not matching the current common descriptions at all. The idea that the Ozark Howler is a cat-like creature supposedly originates from a sighting in the early 1980s when a truck driver who had pulled off the road for the night described seeing a black, cat-like creature that had a long tail, shaggy fur, a stocky build, a beard, and red eyes. There has been speculation that the Ozark Howler might merely be a misidentified big cat. The Arkansas Fish and Game Department does not recognize its existence as a previously unknown animal because no one has ever caught one or recovered a body. Instead, the agency says that these sightings are actually of pet panthers that have somehow escaped captivity. There are similar elements to folklore about the Ozark Howler of America. First of all, there's the general size and shape of the animal: large, stocky, black fur, and glowing eyes. Ozark locals describe the Ozark Howler as a cat-like creature 3 or 4 feet at the shoulder, much larger than any lynx, but also point out that the beast is supposed to have a rather stocky build. The difference between a stocky cat of such size and a large dog is not as great as one might think, especially if they are seen at night. The Ozark Howler is reported to be a nocturnal beast. Another theory on the identity of the Ozark Howler links it to the extinct saber-toothed cats, Smilodon, the idea here being that it may be a modern descendant of these animals. The most recent sightings of the Ozark Howler do not include the immediate death of the observer, but older reports and the resulting legends recorded by visiting university students and newspaper reporters include references to the belief that the Ozark Howler could cause the death of any human so unlucky as to catch its attention, merely by staring at the person. My favorite is the Cherokee story of Spearfinger, a shape-shifting witch who ate the livers of people she found in the woods. She smells of rotten meat and attracts flies. If you see flies in the woods, beware. Spearfinger may be near. I grew up in the woods of WNC, knowing as much as a child can know that there were things in the woods. It didn't occur to me until today that the story of Spearfinger might be related to a family story I like to share. My dad grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, but after growing marijuana in his parents' attic and working on a tree farm, it became obvious that he had a green thumb and a love for growing things. My parents met at college, married quickly, and, joining the Back to the Land movement that was popular at the time, bought a big piece of property where my dad would start his own tree farm. The property lies in a town by another name, but if you look at it on topographical maps, the area where we lived is called Indian Place. At the bottom of our property was an expanse of low floodplains that lie along the river and are filled with sandy loam, which is the best soil for growing anything that you will find in the mountains. The Cherokee also knew this and had a settlement there long ago. When my dad would till up the fields to put in a new row of saplings, we would follow him, plucking arrowheads and pottery shards out of the loam. One day, as he was tilling, my dad struck a big, flat rock. This was common, and he wrestled it out like he would any other rock. This one gave him pause because of its shape. It was uniformly thick and almost a parallelogram in shape. He brushed it off and saw that purposeful lines had been etched into the granite. It was obvious that it was the handiwork of the Cherokee. My father had an acquaintance who was an expert on Cherokee artifacts, so he took it to him to see if he had any idea what the stone was. The acquaintance looked at him and shuddered. "This is a map," he said. "And these are the streams on your property. And this means there is something evil up here in the woods at the head of this stream. Maybe it was Spearfinger." San Diego. Proctor Valley Monster, a collection of several different types of paranormal goings-on in Proctor Valley, none of which are terribly unique. Ghost lady in a white dress that hitchhikes. Phantom headlights chase cars in the middle of the night. Children's handprints that appear on cars driving through the area are attributed to a bus of kids that were killed or something. Chupacabra. Etc. Quest Haven, a religious retreat in the elfin forest that was at one point run by a witch's coven. Haven Bakery is owned by a single father with a small handful of employees. One day, he left to run into town and returned to find his child dead in the basement due to a mishap involving falling down the stairs and catching their neck on a hanging electrical cable. Dude snaps, calls all of his employees in, and murders them with a shotgun when they arrive. He moves the bodies to an outdoor restroom and hangs himself inside the bakery. It was left abandoned for decades after that. Blood could still be found on the walls and on the hook he hung himself with as well. The buildings were finally demolished around 2005 to make way for development, but nothing was ever built on the land, and it is still, to this day, a vacant lot hidden by trees on Campo Road. Hamul Kiln. In the late 1800s, a woman came into possession of a large tract of land. Resources were discovered on the land that could be used to produce a large amount of concrete. She decides to build a massive kiln to produce said concrete and become the main supplier to the developing San Diego area. She pays the majority of her wealth to a man from the East Coast to come here and teach her how to use it. He ends up taking the money and disappearing. The kiln still stands in a remote part of Hamul, never used and mostly untouched. My hometown in southern Arizona has a legend of 3 witches, skinwalkers, and a gargoyle. I personally believe I've witnessed the later 2. Alright, I guess we will start with the skinwalker incidents. Like I said, I grew up in a small town in Arizona, literally surrounded by open desert. We used to play a game called Ditch 'em in which all the neighborhood kids, roughly a dozen, would split into 2 teams, one team hides and one team seeks. The play zone was the 2-street neighborhood and the desert south of a canal. While my friend and I were hiding in the desert, I heard a voice call my name in a low but yet strong echo-like voice from the desert to the south, which is not in the play area. I ignore it because, honestly, every time I've been out in the desert at night, I would hear this. But my friend also heard it this time, which confirmed a lot of things for me. He says to me, "I've heard it call my name too," and the moment he's done saying that, we hear the voice call his name. So we decided to hightail it back to the neighborhood and just play the game there. The second incident with skinwalkers was in the same neighborhood late at night. Another friend and I were walking to a friend's house. And this guy comes walking out from the street corner, going from our left to right. For whatever reason, the moment we saw him, we froze. He kept crossing the street right in front of us, staring us down, but we couldn't make out his face, and his eyes glowed slightly. He's wearing a dark robe, which is odd because it's summer in Arizona. I see he's not walking, but actually he's floating, or maybe gliding. All we knew was that his movement was unnatural in nature. As he finishes crossing the street on our side that heads to the desert, we move and look to see where he's going. And yes, you guessed it, he was gone. After that, I had many nights where it would sound like coyotes fighting right outside my window. I would look outside, and nothing was there. Then one night, I woke up with this feeling of pure dread. I knew something was outside my window. I heard something tapping and scratching lightly on it. I mustered up my courage and opened my blinds. Nothing was there. Then I looked down. There was a black mass moving on the ground under my window on the outside. Needless to say, I was scared. My gut told me something really bad was outside. I go back to my bed and cover myself in my blanket. As I do that, the fighting sound of the coyotes starts again, and I hear it get fainter and fainter. To say this, as a child, I thought this was ghosts or demons, but as I got older and heard stories of the skinwalkers, I believe these are the culprits. Also, as a side note, if you go into that same desert and start digging, you will find pottery. Now moving on to the gargoyle, I was heading outside at night by myself to meet up with some friends. As I walked out my front door, I would always look up at the stars and take a deep breath. This night had a full moon, which is always beautiful. As I'm looking up at the moon and just taking it all in, I see a huge creature with wings fly across and silhouette across the moon's face. It could be a bat, owl, or hawk, right? I disagree due to the way it flapped. Its wings were slow and heavy, the shape was bat-like, and when its wings were open, I saw a humanoid shape in its center. I stood there in awe as it disappeared from the face of the moon and into the night. I thought to myself that my mind was playing tricks on me, but I know what I saw. A couple weeks later, I ended up telling my friend and his dad about what I saw. His dad responded to me, "That's the Coolidge gargoyle. I've seen him too when I rode my quad by the Coolidge airport and he shot out from the desert floor into the sky. I think I scared him more than he scared me." Growing up with a Mexican grandmother in Southern California, I grew up listening to tales of El Diablo, the devil, phantasmas, ghosts, most notably La Llorona, the spirit of a woman who lost her children and wandered nights looking for kids to claim as her own. My family would use this story as a way to make sure the kids wouldn't be home late at night. I also grew up hearing about duendes or gnomes, though not just from my abuela, grandmother. My grandmother would tell stories of duendes playing tricks on people in the forest. She told a story about how she once saw some as a child. Growing up, I would go to large family gatherings. The kind where everyone is a tio, uncle, tia, aunt, or primo, cousin, even if they really weren't. So at one of these family gatherings, I must have been around 15 years old at the time, there was a large group of younger primos. The group consisted of about 6 or so primos, female cousins, ranging from 5 to 12. You would always see them playing together, always smiling and happy. So at this particular family gathering, I noticed the oldest one, I'll call her Jackie, off in a corner watching the primos play. She had a despondent look on her face, which I had never seen before. I asked her what was the matter, and she'd shake her head. I left her alone for a while, and later on she approached me and said that she could tell me but that I wouldn't believe her. I told her I'd try my best to believe her, and she told me that she'd tell me, but that I wouldn't believe her, and that she didn't care if I did or not. She appeared almost scared to tell me. So her story goes that she saw duendes creep into her room that she shared with her younger sister. She said she saw 4 duendes come into her room from her open window, climb up her dresser, take something, and leave. I'm sure she gave other details, but it's been too long to remember. I'd love to ask her now as an adult, but it's been years since I've seen or heard of her. At 15, my first impression was that she was making all this up, but I found it strange that she would lie. I found the way that she told me strange. This girl seemed genuinely scared of the experience she had had. The next story I heard when I was around 18 years old was from my best friend's mom, who grew up in Bolivia, close to the jungle. She said that as a little girl, she was lured into the jungle by being put into a trance-like state by duendes. She remembers feeling that the duendes wanted to play with her, so she followed them towards the jungle and was only snapped out of the trance by her younger sister, who had grabbed her before entering the thick of the jungle. This was an honest woman well into her 50s who said things as they were. My last story comes from a good friend of mine who, I believe, is honest and has a good head on her shoulders. It's actually my girlfriend. The story she told me comes from the Philippines. She told me a few other stories that might relate to cryptozoology. So about 10 years ago, she visited the Philippines, and while staying at an aunt's house, she noticed her younger cousin behaving oddly. She mentioned it to her aunt, who told her that her cousin plays with duendes. They also call them duendes in the Philippines. When asking her cousin, who was around 7 years old, about the duendes, she told her that she would play with them out near the bushes. She told her the duendes would get mad if she refused to play with them. They would at times hold her back from returning to her house when her mother called, but they wanted to continue playing with her. They even hurt her at times. The aunt confirmed that she had seen them and had been trying to figure out a way to shield her daughter from the dudes. My girlfriend's aunt told her recently that if she asked her daughter about it now, she wouldn't recall any of it. Perhaps due to the trauma of those experiences, who knows? Accounts of duendes, gnomes, or little people come from all over the world. I've just mentioned some from 4 different countries on 2 different continents. I don't believe them to be a work of literary fiction, but a creature we have yet to officially place. True scary. To begin this tale, there are a few things you should know. This happened during my first semester of my sophomore year of college. It was winter at this time, so snow was everywhere, and the moon was usually blocked out by clouds. I lived and went to college in the Black Hills. For those of you who don't know, it's a giant national forest made up of dense pine trees. It also overlaps with Native American reservation land and was the site of many confrontations during Indian relocation. On this particular night, my friends and I had thought it would be chill to drive through a nearby scenic canyon right outside of town, smoke a bit of pot, and look at the stars. We accomplished the first 2 tasks, but it was hard to look at the stars because clouds were drifting across the sky and blocking up most of it. There were 5 of us in total that night. I and one other friend just wanted to head back to campus and maybe play some video games and chill for the rest of the night. The other 3 thought it would be a great idea to find a random trail and take a nighttime hike through the forest. Since the majority rules, we went with that option and found a pretty secluded area with several trails winding through dense parts of the forest. We all got out, grabbed some blankets from the trunk to wrap around ourselves because it was just so dang cold, picked a trail at random, and started off. We had been on the trail for about 20 minutes and had been using the lights on our phones because, again, the night sky was obstructed by clouds. The trail wasn't even halfway done at this point. My friend at the front of the group stopped suddenly and flashed her phone up to the trees on the side of the trail in front of us a few yards. She said, "Do you guys see that?" We all copied her and flashed our phones up there. At first, I thought she was just hallucinating from the weed, but then a shape started to take form. My initial reaction was that it was a bobcat, since it was lower to the ground than a mountain lion and seemed to be crouching. One friend shouted, "Oh crap, it's a deer." I was scared for a second. And another said, "No, it's a rabbit." No one seemed to be able to pinpoint what it was or what size it should be. As we were arguing about what it was, it turned its head towards us, and its eyes flashed in our phone lights. I have to tell you, I have been hunting all my life. I have had all types of cats, dogs, cattle, you name it, around me as I grew up. This means I have seen quite a few animals, and now I see how their eyes glow, either from predators or prey. This thing's eyes were both those of an animal and completely different, and I did not know what on God's green earth it was. It was not human, animal, or anything else I had come across before. It chilled me more than the cold of winter ever could. After it had turned towards us, my friends had died off in their arguing and had begun what I could only describe as a sick, terrifying sort of stare-off between all 5 of us and this creature. Then it did something that I will never forget for as long as I live. It stood up. I had thought it was a bobcat, my friends had thought it was animals of varying sizes, but nothing extraordinarily large. As it stood, it kept going higher and higher and higher until it reached what I assumed to be at least 7 3/4 feet, if not larger. I assume it was larger because, as soon as it hit that mark, my friends and I all started screaming and sprinting back the way we had come. A trail that took us 20 minutes to stumble through in our state took us only 5 when we were running like our lives depended on it. We all dove into the car, the driver floored it, and we sped all the way back to campus. After catching our breaths, we kept asking each other things like, "What the duck was that?" Or "Did you see that thing?" And also, "Was the thing real?" That night, we all recollected what we saw, solidified that it was not just a hallucination, decided it was some sort of animal, and agreed to move on with our lives. Only I can't. My friends all told me it was just a bear and not to worry because we had gotten away. I can't believe it. That thing, from what I had seen of it, was emaciated and had protruding bones under its skin. I couldn't see if it was skin or fur, just its silhouette, shadows around it, and flashes of its build. Also, it was the middle of ducking winter, no bears would be out, and they also never ventured to this part of the Black Hills. Remember how I mentioned reservation land around the area? Well, even though I myself am not a Native American, I grew up on a reservation of the Lakota Sioux, the same tribe that inhabits parts of the Black Hills. They have many, many myths and folklore about various creatures that live in the hills. I took it upon myself to think back on some of the legends that I was told growing up and also ask some of the elders from the tribe that I knew. They gave me some possible answers. I will tell you about 2 of them. The first one is an innocent, if not familiar, character from Lakota legends. His name is Shie Tonka. He is their version of Bigfoot. Lakota tribe members and storytellers debate whether or not this is a singular creature or an entire species, but all the same, it is a mostly harmless being that just wanders the forest and can act as an older brother in native stories. Altogether, it would not have been that terrifying if that was what was on the trail that night. However, I unfortunately have to side with the next creature as being the probable one we met. There is a malicious spirit in Lakota myth called Double Face. He takes the shape of a man, sometimes an animal, sometimes something in between. He is also described as looking like an ogre, but I'd like to keep Shrek out of this. His front face is that of a human, if a bit disfigured. If you see this one, you are fine, but not if you stick around. He will try to convince you to take a peek at the face on the back of his head, which, once you look at it, will paralyze you or kill you with a single glance. If it does not kill you, Double Face will finish the deed by beating you to death or eating you alive. That's a common theme in a lot of native lore, cannibalism. I ruled out Wendigos because if there had been one, I would not be alive to tell this story. You may think it's ridiculous that I am putting so much credence on these supposed myths, but until you have seen what I saw in the dark of night in the Black Hills, sat at a campfire with elders as they blessed you with sage, and listened as they provided you with both answers and caution moving forward, you will never understand how terrifying it is to realize that not all legends stay in stories. In the depths of the Pacific Northwest's enigmatic waters resides a captivating and mysterious creature known as Cadborosaurus wilsey, affectionately dubbed Caddy. With its serpentine form and tales of elusive appearances, Caddy has managed to capture the imaginations of sailors, researchers, and enthusiasts, creating an aura of wonder and curiosity that transcends the boundaries of the known. The origins of Caddy's legend trace back to the indigenous First Nations people along Canada's Pacific coast. Emerging from their rich oral traditions were stories of a sea serpent characterized by a long body and distinctive humps. The first recorded sighting by European settlers emerged in 1933 near Cadboro Bay in British Columbia, Canada, giving the creature its unique name, Cadborosaurus wilsey. Descriptions of Caddy often mirror those of a plesiosaur, a prehistoric, long-necked marine reptile believed to have vanished millions of years ago. Caddy's features, though diverse in their portrayal, commonly include a snake-like body, multiple humps, a head reminiscent of a horse's, and flippers or appendages. Witnesses have frequently recounted observing its head and neck breaching the water's surface, leaving behind a trail of distinctive waves that mirror its path. Encounters with Caddy span across the coastlines of Canada, the United States, and even as far as Japan. There was a legend in my hometown that there was a crazy homeless guy who lived in the woods behind the high school. They called him El Enredadera del Rio, the river creeper, because they thought he lived in the river, and there was a big Hispanic population in my hometown. They said he was nearly 8 feet tall and had superhuman strength. He grew hair all over his body, like an ape. They said he wore patches of ivy over himself, becoming part of the forest, that he grew his fingernails to razor-sharp claws, and that he could strip the skin off of a squirrel with a single swipe. They said he would bite the jugular veins of small animals and suck the blood right out of them, unless he could get his hands on human flesh. Girls who went jogging late in the day would say that he jumped out and tried to grab them. I found a camp once, and I thought for sure it was his. A bunch of branches leaned up against a tree to make a hut down on the river bank. Once, in senior year, a bunch of friends and I got drunk and decided we were going to hunt him down. We gathered up a bunch of nets, pitchforks, and baseball bats and spent all night stumbling around the forest chasing shadows. It was pretty awesome. The White Thing is a Bigfoot-like creature who allegedly lives around my area. I have known 6 people personally who have seen it, every one of them being totally level-headed people, and there are dozens of others who have shared their experiences online. The descriptions I have heard of it were malnourished-looking legs, pale gray skin falling off like rags, horns like Pan from Pan's Labyrinth, glowing, giant, was able to simply step over my friend's fence, winged. One of my friends claimed it flew over her car late one night, and that it was able to walk effortlessly across the treetops and/or power lines. A couple of years ago, I went on a study abroad trip with my university to Australia for a couple of months. We started in Darwin and traveled south. The bus ride itself was pretty uneventful, except for me and my friend being accidentally left at Devil's Marbles for a few hours, but that's another story. We stayed at a hostel in Alice Springs and got up before dawn to drive to Uluru. The rest of the students had decided to go back to sleep for the bus ride, but I was looking out the window at what little I could make of the scenery. It was that time right before dawn when you're first able to make out your surroundings. The bus slowed down to park and made a turn into an empty lot, and that's when I saw it. An extremely large shadow was walking through the bush. I'm a bad judge of height, but it was taller than any human I had ever seen, perhaps 10 feet tall with extremely elongated arms and legs. Even though there was enough light to make out details of the landscape, the figure appeared completely, well, detail-less. It was smooth, black, and featureless. The black was a stark contrast to the rest of the scenery, as there was a thin mist in the area. I've seen flashes of shadows driving before or something out of the corner of my eye, but this was different, as I was able to watch it for several slow seconds as he walked in this odd swaying, dipping motion with a distinct grace, moving effortlessly across the bush. I felt like, as soon as I saw it, I had been electrocuted, every hair standing up and skin prickling. I tried to wake my friend, but by the time she looked out the window, it was gone. I'm sure this could be explained by possible sleep deprivation or just seeing shadows, but I personally feel what I saw was real. If anyone has any local legends for the area, I would love to hear them. This seems like a great community, and I would enjoy any information others might have. It's a cold and cloudy winter evening, and I had just woken up from a nice little power nap. So I slowly got up and went to the kitchen to get something to eat. I got some food, heated it up, and went to sit down and watch some YouTube. I sat down and found a video of urban legends on my homepage. I was interested, so I clicked on it and watched it. It showed the usual goat man and moth man, but one urban legend caught my eye. A urban legend called the Orange Eyes. I was intrigued and watched it. The video creator said that it was a big-footed creature, it was tall and had glowing orange eyes. But what I was really surprised about was that it was an urban legend from my state, so after I heard that information, I looked up where it was supposed to be. And I found that it was only a 15-minute drive from me, so like any other adventurous human, I hit up my friend and asked if he wanted to come with me and go look for it. He told me that he doesn't believe in that stuff and it was a waste of time, but I begged him, and finally, after a couple of minutes, he agreed. I was really excited. I got dressed and packed some flashlights because it's almost 9. After I was done packing up supplies, I got in my car and headed to pick up my friend. When I got there, he didn't look too excited and said that he was tired. He got in the car, and we were on our way. I told him the details and what the thing looked like, and he said, "There's no way that thing is real." I told him that it would be fun and that there's probably nothing out there. We got to the road that would take us straight to the area we could get out of to be closer to the forest entrance. While driving down the road, I couldn't help but shake the feeling of being watched, but I tried not to notice the feeling and kept heading down to the entrance. We got to the entrance, and I handed my buddy a flashlight because it was pitch black outside. I asked him if he was ready, and he said that he was good. So we start the nightmarish journey into the forest of the Orange Eyes. We walked for a good hour or so with nothing really happening. My buddy said that he was tired and wanted to go back home, but I told him let's stay for 2 more hours. He agreed, and we continued walking. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched again. I asked my friend if he felt the same way, and he said, "Yeah, ever since we turned onto the road that headed down here, I felt like I was being watched." We were both on edge now as we continued forward. Not too long after the feeling of being watched, we heard to our right something being snapped, like if someone or something stepped on a branch. We both jumped at the sound of it and pointed our flashlights over in the direction of the noise, but to our relief, it was just a little bit. We joked around with each other about who jumped more at the sound. We did this for a minute or two. We were in the middle of having a little argument when we heard heavy breathing coming from my left. We stopped arguing and listened closely to see if it was what we heard. We heard the heavy breathing, like we thought we did. I didn't want to shine my light over there, so I tried to see if I could see anything. Thinking back to it, I wish I didn't look because what I saw would haunt me for the rest of my life. What I saw standing there behind a tree was a 10-foot creature standing there with one of its eyes peering around the tree. And what shook me to the core was that its eyes were an orangish red color. At this point, I wanted to pass out of fear, but I stopped that from happening. I looked at my buddy, and I could tell that he saw it too. I told him that we needed to get out of here now before it's too late. We both agreed that we would take off at a dead sprint back to the car. I told him on 3 we would go. I started to count, but I couldn't even get to 2 when I felt a warm breath hit the back of my neck. At that point, I screamed, "Run!" We kicked it into gear and ran as fast as we could. As we were running, I heard the tree moving and felt the ground shaking. My lungs were burning from the thin, cold air. We ran for what felt like hours until we saw the car. I reached into my pocket for my car key and, with one swift movement, unlocked the car, opened the door, and turned the car on. I put the car in reverse so fast that I felt like I could have been a stuntman for a racing movie. I hit the gas and flung the car around like an action movie. I put the car in drive and floored it down the road, never looking back once. Once we felt like we were a good distance away, we eased up a bit. I asked my buddy if he was okay, and he said he was fine. All I did on the drive home was think about how close the creature was to me for me to feel its breath. I dropped my buddy off and told him to be safe and take care. When I got home, I took everything off, took a shower, and went to bed. The next morning was good. I felt like the day before was just a bad dream. But I realized really soon that it was real because the backpack that I had used to carry my stuff had a big slash in it, probably from the thing or a tree branch. When we were running away, I called my friend to check if he was alright, and I continued my day after. By now, I've kind of gotten over it, and my friend doesn't think of it anymore. From that experience, I don't want to go to a forest to hike or camp anymore. I hope you take something from this and learn to not be stupid like me and go out to a forest at night. El Salvador, and some legends of the country itself. Now I'm not sure if that's all true or not. It's just a legend I heard. These old houses are open to the public, I believe. But I went to an upscale private school there with very privileged kids, and there was a boy named Angel Garola that went there. He was Salvadorian but had whiter skin than I did, blue eyes, and blonde hair. And down there, that is the beauty standard. Anyone with those physical characteristics is considered to be very beautiful. And those aren't the normal physical characteristics of a Salvadorian at all. Perhaps he wasn't actually Salvadorian, but I could have sworn he was. He was, at the very least, Hispanic. Also, there is an Angel Garola in the famous Garola family. The famous Angel Garola, who is supposed to have been the one who made the deal with the demon or devil, this was widely known across the country. So if he had only shared the same last name by coincidence, why would his parents name him Angel to share the same exact name as that person? My friends actually told me that he was from this family, but I wasn't sure if they were telling the truth, trying to scare me, or if it was just a rumor. But this isn't a common first or last name there either, and he's the only Angel or Garola I've met there. Here's an interesting article I found in English that explains the history of this family, if you're interested. In this article, though, they explain the strange physical characteristics of this family, and it turns out he shared the same characteristics, which is very chilling to me. I didn't know this until I searched for an article for this story. Remember, this is a very tiny country, so odds are he was part of that family. Another legend I was told was of a demon who disguised itself as a woman and smelled of roses. So if you ever smelled roses very suddenly, it meant this demon was nearby. There's more to the story, but I can't remember. I think it's their version of Bloody Mary, but I could be wrong. Apparently witchcraft is very common there as well, and when you see a cat or crow, it could possibly be a witch disguising itself. North Texas. There is something called the Three Witches in our city, and they are 3 stone statues of witches, and apparently they are supposed to be haunted. They will speak if you stand close to them for long enough. My mother didn't believe this and was skeptical that statues could talk to her. She was with her youth group at church, and they dared her to go stand in between the statues since she didn't believe it was real. They took her to the statues, and she saw them for the first time and immediately had an evil feeling coming from them. She did the dare, and she walked up and stood in between the statues, and the youth group drove off and left her there alone. She didn't hear anything at first and started to feel more confident in her skepticism, and she started to doubt that the urban legend was true. She stood there for like 40 minutes, and at the very last minute, when she was about to give up on the dare, one of the statues turned its head and looked at her and started screaming. She ran down the dirt road, and the youth group laughed at her. She told them what happened, and they all got serious and said, "I told you so." The statues are still up today, and I want to be able to go there and take pictures or a video and prove the urban legend. North Carolina's most famous mystery or legend is probably what happened to the Lost Colony. One of the earliest English settlements, maybe even the earliest, settled on Roanoke Island. When more people came over from England to check on the colony's progress, the colony was abandoned. The only trace of them was the word Croatoan carved into a nearby tree. Nobody knows for sure what happened. Some people believe the local Croatoan tribe wiped out the colonists, but I think the popular theory is that the colonists integrated with the tribe and left with them. Nobody knows for certain, though. Gold Camp Road. There is a set of tunnels that used to take you through the mountains of Colorado. This used to be one of the only ways to cross this certain area. From what I remember. So now that we have the background and the story. The story goes that one day there was a bus full of children going on a field trip from what is now Colorado Springs. They're on their merry way, headed up through the mountains. They hit the third tunnel on Gold Camp Road. While going through the tunnel, it collapsed, killing all 18 children. I seriously don't remember the real number, and the teacher. Super tragic. Fast forward some years, and it's what I'll call modern time since it's 2021 now, and this was like the 70s or 80s. I don't know if that's correct, but you get the point. There is a family going through the third tunnel of Gold Camp, and again, the tunnel starts to collapse. The car is lagging forward at an alarming pace outside of the tunnels, just before the tunnel caves in on itself. The man, his wife, and his family get out of the car, not really believing what happened. The man then goes to inspect his car for damage. You know what he found on the back of his dusty old Ford? Embellishment, no clue the make or model? 18 tiny sets of kid-sized handprints. The story goes that the spirits of those kids live in the tunnels. And saved this man and his family, which consisted of small school-aged children. The tunnels are closed to cars and humans now, but you can make it up the road via hike to about 10 feet from their entrance. My mom seems to firmly believe in the existence of gnomes or elves, duendes. Although she tends to jokingly put blame on these hidden little people for everything from misplaced keys to a dead car battery, she does have a serious belief in them. Something like a natural creature humans can occasionally run into. I asked her quite a long time ago what convinced her so firmly, so a few details are a bit fuzzy. Her answer was simply that she had seen one. For a bit of context, my mom bought into a lot of new agey stuff near 2003 and gathered a sizable amount of connections with that community. Be it Reiki, crystals, or glass pyramids that collect energy, she knew someone who claimed expertise. One of those friends, Norma, called herself a witch. My mom told me that one day, when she was visiting her, she kept seeing shadows at the edge of her vision. She sat down on a sofa, and it began shaking. She supposedly heard laughter and felt a cold gust of air. She asked Norma, worried about bad vibrations in her house, but she answered it was the gnomes. They don't like to have visitors, apparently. It didn't help that Norma's house had a rather extensive garden. My mom told me this when I was about 8 years old, and it stuck up to the point where it still makes me feel a bit uneasy. I asked her recently if she had made it all, and she denied it. I can't think of a reason she would lie, and it's simple enough to not be outlandish. I lived near the area where they filmed The Blair Witch, so you can imagine the types of urban legends we had in town. Notably, there was this area with an abandoned mill and a field with another abandoned house slightly further away. The mill was close to some houses and was kind of touristy, so nothing scary about that. The house and the field, however, had so many stories about it. The family was a group of cannibals who ate themselves, performed satanic rituals, and the whole damn nine. Being the reckless teenagers we were, one night we set out to explore the house. You had to walk about a mile through the field to get to it. When we finally got there, I knew from looking at it that the damn thing was on its last legs. I'm talking about a single stiff breeze that would probably knock it over. It was an older farmhouse, and I went into the front door/living area. There were old newspapers laying around, but nothing else really of note. There was a staircase towards the side of the room that led to the floor above. We went over and just kind of stood, daring each other to go upstairs. Finally, the bravest of us took a few steps upstairs, and we could hear something sliding around on the floor above, reacting to the noise of the stairs creaking. That was enough for me, and I noped right back outside. Not only was the house falling apart, but the possibility of 1. A homicidal ghost. 2. A rabid raccoon. 3. A hobo wielding a board with a nail in it. 4. A zombie that escaped from a nearby mansion. Was too much for me. I waited outside, pondering the house's history, while they continued to scare each other and explore inside, despite the now much louder rustling in the attic. Finally, I heard an audible thump from where I was standing. It had come from the top floor. Finally, this was enough for my friends, and they made haste to the exit. But alas, the house would not cooperate. I heard a loud creak thump, then a wail from one of my female friends, and I ran back inside. Everyone was gathered around her because, as she had been sprinting to get outside, the floor gave out underneath her, and her leg was caught between the broken floorboards. All the while, this thumping and groaning in the attic is getting louder and closer. There were 4 of us there, so the 3 of us gathered around her and hefted her out. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. When she finally got free, we bolted as the thump groans made it to the top of the stairs. We ran so ducking fast back through that field, with the 2 guys helping my other friend hobble along. In the end, my friend had to get a tetanus shot and wear a splint for a few weeks. I told those mother duckers it wasn't safe, but hey, adventure, am I right? To this day, I don't know what was on the top floor of the house. The rational part of my brain knows it was probably just a homeless person or some kind of animal. I still like being kind of close to the area, so I've debated going back during the day, but I'm willing to bet the house has toppled over by now. I used to live in a town that had a cult. The story goes that back in the 1970s, two teenagers who were at the local Christian summer camp that basically owned the town wanted to rebel against the camp and their parents and went into the woods and started their own cult. They even brought more people in from the camp. The camp at the time was a nice place. So this cult was just a bunch of teenagers ducking off in the woods, getting high, drinking, and having a good time. They called themselves a cult to be rebels. Until they brought someone new in who was into the occult. This new kid brought them to this old cemetery that has a tunnel that runs under the road about a mile away and out into the other side of the woods. They went into the tunnel, and the kid brought an animal, a dog or cat, depending on the story, but it was always a pet from the camp, and they killed it. After that, everyone got into the occult, and there were a lot of rituals and sacrifices. Supposedly, those kids stayed at the camp and ran it today. Today, the camp is very creepy. Teenagers will try to bring you into the camp. My husband and I lived back in the woods for a while, about half-mile from the tunnel. At the time, we didn't have a car, but we loved to walk, and town was 2 miles from us, so we would walk daily. During the day, this area in which the tunnel and cemetery are located is very quiet, but at night it's loud, like natural wood noises, but loud just in that one spot. The legend today is that the kids from the camp are in the cult and will try to bring outsiders in to sacrifice them. The cemetery is creepy as duck, and when you go up there, you always feel like someone is watching you. And the tunnel, well, I only went there once and didn't experience it, but my husband says he has. The story has it that if you go there at night, you can hear the screams of the cult victims, which is what the loudness is. This happened back when I lived in the old house where I grew up. It was built in the 1930s or 1940s. Nothing ever happened that my skeptical mind didn't dismiss as some mental trickery, stuff like seeing someone move by out of the corner of my eye or hear people talking when no one else was there. On occasion, something would happen that even I couldn't explain, like when the old peaceful dog would start growling at the closed basement door, only for me to open it and go down there to find nothing weird, or hearing someone walking up the old and very creaky stairs, but I would look down and, again, nothing would be on the steps. It all just seemed normal, though, as I had grown up with this stuff, so I didn't put much thought into these things. That was until one night. I was lying in my bed, which was next to the second floor window, so I could turn and look right out the window while laying down. It was about 1 a.m, and I couldn't fall asleep, so I was just staring at the cluster of tall pine trees in one of the nearby backyards. There wasn't much going on out there, but that's when I saw something in one of the higher branches of the trees, like a large shadow or something. My eyes focused on it because it was almost the size of a full-grown adult, but it was climbing on all fours with its back hunched up like a scared cat, not to mention that it was on a very thin branch too small to support something of its weight, almost 80 feet in the air. The thing sort of shuffled around the branch, which bent slightly and swayed with its movements. It moved out of the shadow of a higher branch, and I noticed it had light tan Caucasian skin and looked almost malnourished. For a while, I just stared, racking my brain for an explanation, trying to think of any kind of animal that would look like that and be native to the Midwest. Then, as though startled by something, it turned its head around, scanning the ground far below. Its face had a large-looking mouth with no noticeable nose and what looked like one large eye socket, a shadow cast over its eye. It looked down, then it began to move its gaze upward, looking over the rooftops for something. Then, it looked right at me. We just stared at each other for what felt like hours, its eye still hidden in shadow. Then, slowly, it backed into the tree, the branch bouncing slightly as it backed away, then stopped moving after the thing disappeared. I never saw that thing again after that, maybe because I moved soon after, but even after almost a year, I still can't get that emotionless face out of my mind. I can't find any kind of urban legend or myth about anything like that, so if anyone knows about this mysterious creature, I would like to know. I have a few. The first is about a hill that is used by occultic types for ritual sacrifice. There will be a trail of bones leading to a clearing, the trees will be littered with various organ debris along the way, usually goats and cows are sacrificed, and in that clearing will be a hut that actual human remains will have been discovered in. The police tape it off, then the group moves to another location until another missing person gets found. Don't go trick or treating alone. Spook level 4. The second involves a railroad track at the base of a hill where a school bus full of children got stuck and was subsequently struck by a train, killing all on board. The story goes that it's haunted, and if you dust your car and park it on the tracks, your car will move off the tracks, and you'll see little handprints all over your car. Spook level 7. I've lived in towns and cities in 3 states with the exact same urban legends, and I would not be surprised if others have similar stories. So either children used to die by the thousands in horrific bus collisions and their parents grieved by sacrificing goats in the woods, or someone is spreading urban legends across the country. This story comes from my cousin, Ralph. It's been about 20 years since I've heard it, so I'll just stick with what I remember. This took place in the 1950s in a very rural area of eastern Kentucky. At the time, cars weren't much of a thing there, and it wasn't uncommon for people to ride horses, wagons, or buggies. So, Ralph is walking home from his girlfriend's house and ended up getting a late start, so it was dark by the time he was on the way. He said the moon was so bright you could still see everything fairly well, though. He makes it a fair bit down the road and starts to hear a horse coming toward him from up ahead. He moves over to the side of the road to give it plenty of room, and I assume he doesn't get run over. It gets closer, and he can see that it's a horse pulling a wagon. It gets right next to him, and he can see a figure sitting at the helm of the wagon, and this figure has no head. The torso and shoulders kind of turned toward him, like it was looking at him, minus the head. He watched it go on by him all the way until it was totally out of sight, then ran the rest of the way home, even taking a shortcut through the creek just to get there a little faster. Sounds unbelievable, right? Here's the thing, everyone who knows the story believes him. No exceptions. Ralph is a pretty straight-laced guy and always has been. He doesn't have a sense of humor at all, he is always very serious and straightforward. He's pretty trustworthy too and has never been known to lie or make things up, so everyone believes him about this story, and so do I after hearing it directly from him. So, here's my question to all of you, has anyone else had an experience like this or knows someone who has? If not this particular one, then any kind of old legend? Growing up in Hamilton, I have come across my share of scares, hauntings, and ghosts. Hamilton is a very old town with an ample amount of history. We have a small town within our city called Ancaster. Ancaster is a small but cute and cozy town, just 15 minutes from Hamilton. In this city, there have been stories of hauntings taking place in an area called the Hermitage. The Hermitage is an old abandoned mansion that can be found down a short path to a hidden place with abundant amounts of history and legend behind it. Many people have experienced paranormal events and have admitted to hearing and even seeing things such as dark mists, shadows, animals with bright red eyes lurking in the bushes, and a young boy that roams the grounds of the old mansion of the Hermitage ruins. I was a teenager at the time, and the year was 2002. My boyfriend, Aiden, just got his driver's license and wanted to go for a night drive. We invited a few of our friends along and decided to take a night walk of our own. We were a bit skeptical back then and young, so it wasn't the brightest idea we've ever had. We drove up to the Hermitage. It was about 9 p.m. in December, so it was pretty cold and dark out around that time of the year. We all agreed we would just take a quick walk around the grounds and head back to the car. As Aiden and I began to walk hand in hand through the snow-packed grass, we laughed to ourselves about how silly this all was, and there is no way we will come across anything haunted. Then I thought I had seen something up ahead. I pulled Aiden's arm close to mine and whispered to him, "Do you see a little boy up ahead, or are my eyes playing tricks on me?" He squinted his eyes to focus a bit better as he wore contacts, looked at me, and said, "That's definitely a little boy." The boy was sitting at the edge of a pretty high hill, the type of hill that would be very good for tobogganing. Aiden was hesitant to proceed. He wasn't sure if what we were seeing was real or if it was some sort of joke, but what we saw was indeed a little boy, and as I got closer, he seemed to be more real. He had a rather large, strange hat on, not a cap or a winter hat, a strange-looking hat, like a pirate hat. He had long brown hair that fell below his ears and a very long green jacket that buttoned all the way up, along with tall brown rain boots. His pants were tucked into his boots, and strangely enough, he was holding a fishing rod in his hand. The rod looked homemade, it was a wooden rod. That's when Aiden and I looked at one another with fear and confusion. Why is this little boy alone? Where are his parents? And why does he have a fishing rod? Is he real? Or is this a ghost? Only one way to find out, I thought to myself. I approached the little boy and asked him, "Hi there, are you here all alone, or did you get lost?" The young boy put down his fishing rod to the right side of him and looked up at me with his large, deep blue eyes and skin as fair as the snow. He began to fix his oversized hat and smiled, then giggled and said, "Of course not, ma'am, I am waiting for my father. You see, we are supposed to be going fishing today. It is rather a nice day to be going fishing, if I do say so myself. I am just waiting for him. He should be here any moment now." I was officially freaked out. I was just a young teenager myself. Why is he referring to me as ma'am? He didn't talk the way a normal kid would talk. His accent, which sounded almost British, was very proper, and he was not from around here. He sounded like he came from the 1800s or something. And it was not a nice day to be going fishing. It was cold and there was snow on the ground. Aiden grabbed my hand in complete fear and whispered to me, "Let's get out of here, I really don't think that's a real kid." I looked back at the boy to let him know we should be heading home as it's getting late, but we can wait until his dad gets back. I couldn't believe my eyes. He wasn't there, he was gone. There is no way he could possibly get up and run into the bushes or anywhere in sight. We would have seen him or heard him running through the snow. He just vanished, as if he were never there to begin with. The only thing that remained was his wooden fishing rod. I looked at Aiden in complete terror, and we both started running as fast as we could. We called his friends, who had taken another path, to get back to the car because we had just experienced something unreal and had no time to explain. They said they had seen some creepy things too. We all met at the car, and every time we unlocked the car, it would automatically lock again. So we weren't out of the woods just yet. Aiden looked at me and shouted, "Why do you have his fishing rod? You should have left it." I pulled my tote bag from around my body to see what he was talking about, and I saw the fishing rod sticking out. In complete terror, I assured Aiden I didn't take the rod. I don't understand how it ended up in my bag. Our friends looked at us with fear in their eyes and said, "Wait, you guys saw a boy near the woods waiting for his dad?" We said yes, and we were beyond horrified. How could the same boy be in two places at once? This couldn't be happening. I threw the rod into the bushes and ran back to the car. After 10 minutes of trying to unlock the car, the doors were finally unlocked. We all scrambled into the car and buckled up. Aiden started the car and locked the doors. He hit the gas pedal as hard as physically possible. I had seen a reflection in the side mirror as we drove off. It was the little boy we had seen on the hill, standing there with the fishing rod I threw into the bushes. He was waving at us as we drove by. But he had a sad look on his face. This time, he wasn't alone. A taller, older gentleman was standing behind him with one hand over the boy's shoulder. I could only assume it was his father. They slowly vanished into the darkness as we gained speed while driving away. Aiden noticed I was zoned out and yelled out, "Hello, Earth to Trish? You good?" I didn't want to frighten him or our friends even more, so I didn't tell him what I had just seen. I replied, "Yes, just shaken up. That's all." He grabbed my hand, kissed it, and continued to drive away into the cold, dark roads. We never returned to the Hermitage ruins again. Here in the UK, in the counties of Norfolk and my own county, East Anglia, to be exact, there is a legend of a creature called the Shuck. It's a spectral black dog, widely believed to be an omen of bad luck or death. You might know this legend better as the Grimm if you're a fan of a certain boy wizard. I believe that Rowling took her inspiration directly from the Shuck. I never believed in the Shuck. For most of my life, I was brought up hearing about this beast, but to my mind, it was just a story. That was until I reached adulthood, and I began to see the Shuck within 24 hours of something horrible happening. Always before, never after, a huge black dog would make itself known to me and still does. Until I met my husband at 23, I thought it was just me. No, the Shuck haunts him too. The first time I saw the Shuck was at the age of 18. I was walking my own dog, quite large himself as he was an Akita, when across the field a huge black shape appeared from nowhere, standing absolutely still and staring directly at me. I would have thought nothing of it, except that this massive dog was twice as large as my own. Oh, and when I blink, the dog disappears. The next day, my parents separated after 28 years of perfectly happy marriages in which I had never seen them argue. The first time my husband saw the Shuck, he was in his mid-20s and a rally driver. He was practicing for a stage in Poland, driving up a mountain at high speed, when he briefly saw a black dog to the side of his car, a Ford Focus RS, which thankfully had a full roll cage and bucket seats. Within seconds of seeing this huge dog, he lost control of the car and ended up flying off the side of the mountain. Part of his roll cage snapped and ended up going directly through his thigh. He spent months in the hospital, almost lost his leg to flesh-eating bacteria, and still has issues with that leg many years later. Oh, and his dad died not long after. After we entered into our relationship, having been incredibly close friends for over a year, I fell pregnant quickly. I was supposed to be infertile, so we were ecstatic at this news. All went smoothly until we were driving through the Kent countryside one day and, well, I don't think I need to tell you what appeared to us. That night, I miscarried what I would later find out to be one of the twins. By this point, my husband and I had put two and two together and figured out that we were being stalked by this creature, but it wasn't done with us yet. Towards the end of my pregnancy, we saw it once again while driving in the car. The next day, I died for 4.5 minutes. After taking my son home to our flat, a fourth-floor flat that overlooked allotments, I was gazing blankly out of the window in my bedroom one day while my son napped. There's that damn dog again. I took an overdose that night, desperate to escape the trauma of death. The day that we lost our home, ending up homeless with a baby, Shuck was there. On the day that my brother's relationship fell apart, it was there. On the day that my son had an allergic reaction and ended up in the hospital, it was there. Then, my husband was involved in a truck crash after seeing this bloody Shuck. He was stationary in traffic, hazard lights on in his UPS truck, on a straight road. The driver of the truck behind him was looking at his phone when he crashed into the back of my husband's truck at 50 miles per hour. My husband ended up off work for months, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. The driver of the truck that hit him walked away uninjured, even though the cab of his truck was destroyed completely. So my question, now that I've listed a few of the times this thing has appeared to us, is whether the Shuck is a bad omen or a protection. Both my husband and I should be dead multiple times over, yet we're still here. Is Shuck appearing to warn us? Let us know that it is watching over us. Why us? I've never heard a story of it stalking others the way it does us. Has anyone else had any experience with the Shuck? One thing is for sure, I hope I don't see it for a while. I don't want any more scars. Auburn, New Hampshire. A town almost everybody, even those who live in New Hampshire, hasn't heard of before. However, this quiet little town holds what some call a hole in hell itself. The cave is called Devil's Den, and it was discovered in this great nation's infancy by surveyors. Looking down the cave, they could see nothing but blackness, that is, until the lights started. Orbs, lighting themselves but casting no glow and with no source, were slowly moving inside the depths. The surveyors grew cold, despite it being a warm summer evening, and quickly departed. The cave would grow in the town's folklore, and the lights would be documented by various other townsfolk as well as a watchman standing on a fire tower overlooking the cave in the mid-1950s. I once ventured to the cave myself, and while I saw no lights, I couldn't help but feel a deep dread looking into impenetrable darkness. It was 1992, and I was 16 years old. For context, I am female. I lived with my parents in a small coastal town in Oregon. Lots of dunes, beaches, and rivers, very pretty, but also a lot of transient traffic, tourists, hitchhikers, that sort of thing. The town I grew up in consisted of fishermen and loggers. Everyone pretty much knew everyone, so for the most part, I felt safe. I was working at a fancy fish restaurant in the tiny town of Charleston that sat right in the harbor off the main dock. It was about 15 miles from my house. I only worked a couple nights a week, and my parents would just let me drive their car. I wasn't old enough to serve alcohol, so I worked as a busser. Each server got their own busser, and then at the end of the night, they tipped us out. This new guy named Jay moves to town from New York City. I always worked his shifts, and we got along really well, so after the first few weeks, he started picking me up to be his busser. Which was great. I liked him because he was good at his job, cute, funny, and always tipped me out really well. One night, we were way busier than usual, and it took us a really long time to do our side work. It was well after midnight when we finally finished, so he offered to walk me out to my car. It was very sweet of him, even though I thought it was unnecessary. I grabbed my stuff, and we walked out the back kitchen door. My car was parked in our almost totally empty gravel parking lot. I hopped into the driver's seat of my little Nissan Sentra and started digging through my bag for my keys. All of a sudden, his eyes got wide, and he said, "Why isn't your door locked? Are you crazy?" I laughed. "Well, yeah, of course my doors are unlocked, I never lock them." Jay looked totally mortified. "Why not?" he asked. "Why would I?" I retorted. Stone-faced Jay then sternly told me to lock my door. I started to giggle, and in jest, I put my hands up as if to tell him to relax. I reach over and smack the lock down so he sees it. Then I made a catty comment, something to the effect of "Relax, you're not in New York City anymore." But this wasn't good enough. He then walked around the front of my car and casually opened my passenger door, snapped the lock down, shut the door, and, with a smile of victory, walked back inside the building. I'm still giggling as I drive off. I have to love big city people. It was almost 1 a.m. at this point. Usually I'm done and home by midnight, but I made a lot of money and I was in a super good mood, so I turned up the stereo and headed home. There are two ways for me to get home. There is a main road that is well lit and well traveled but goes all the way around the town, forcing me to loop back around to finally get home. The second route is Libby Lane, which is adjacent to Seven Devils Road and is linked to almost as many urban legends as Route 666. A road I would never walk on at night, and many people avoid driving it, even during the day, but Libby Lane was also by far the shortest route home, as it cut straight through the forest and dropped me off very close to my house. Libby Lane was not lit with lamp posts, and due to its curvy, windy, narrow lanes, it was pretty much only traveled by locals. It was quiet, and oftentimes I would drive all the way home without seeing another vehicle, as large stretches of this road were just desolate. I grew up hearing all kinds of stories about these two roads, everything from boogeymen to satanic worship rituals, even UFO sightings. But I don't scare easily, and I sort of like the creepy feeling of seeing the shadows and darkness of the night engulf my car as I glanced into the rear view mirror. I found it somewhat thrilling. It was a feeling that made me realize how secluded the world can still be and how tiny I am in it. I get about halfway home, and it was super dark, there was no moon out, so all I could see was what my headlights illuminated in front of me. Libby Lane is very windy and narrow, with lots of soft shoulders. For those who don't know what that is, a soft shoulder is soft dirt or sand on the sides of a road that makes it very easy to get your vehicle stuck or even flip over if you drive on it. Out of nowhere, I saw an old Monte Carlo parked in the middle of the lane with its hazard lights on. I could see the blinking red lights from a ways off, and I didn't immediately get suspicious. It was about 10 yards ahead of me when I slowed down to a crawl. As I got closer, it struck me as odd that the car was not just in the middle of the road but was parked diagonally across both lanes, making it very difficult to get around. Still, I just figured he spun out or something. As my car edged closer, I noticed that standing in front of the Monte Carlo was a very tall black man who was at least 6 feet 4 inches, lean, and wearing a long black trench coat. When he saw my lights, he started casually waving his arms up and down at me. Keep in mind that I lived in a town where most locals knew each other or were at least familiar, and this guy was not from here, that much I knew for sure, so I had no intention of letting him inside my car. However, I did intend on stopping to let him know I would call him a tow as soon as I got home. This incident happened in the 1990s, before cell phones were a thing. As I slow even more, I see him walking up to the passenger side door. I come to a full stop and reach over to start rolling down the window. This was a big mistake. Everything from here on happened so fast. The minute my car was at a full stop, his casual walk turned into a sprint as he made a mad dash toward the door handle. He yanked on it once, immediately realizing that my door was locked, and then flew into a fit of rage like I had never seen. Using his left hand to continue pulling on the handle, the man made a fist with his free hand and started punching the window really hard in an obvious attempt to shatter the glass. I was totally caught off guard, and I just started screaming. My heart jumped into my throat, and the next thing I knew, I was in full panic mode. I slammed my car into gear and let off the clutch so fast that I almost stalled out. I had to swerve because his Monte Carlo was like a big boat, and it was blocking most of the lane. I took the risk of driving on the soft shoulder in order to get around his car. Thank God I didn't get stuck, because he would have eventually broken the window. I was sure of that. The whole time I'm driving around his vehicle, he's running beside me, still punching at the windows and pulling on the door. I was close enough to his car that he actually ran into his own front bumper, forcing him to let go of my door handle. I remember driving like a maniac, staring into my rearview mirror, just waiting to see the headlights of his car barreling down on me. I still had a good 30-minute drive to make it home. I swear it was the longest 30-minute drive of my life. He did not follow me, at least I don't think he did. Then again, I knew that road like the back of my hand, so I was pretty sure I could drive it a lot faster than he could. That didn't make the terror I felt any less, though. I got home, ran into the house shaking, and, totally unnerved, I called the police and told them everything. The police drove out to the spot that same night but found nothing, not a single trace. When they spoke to me, they asked me if he said anything to me or if I knew him. It was then that I felt a little perplexed as I thought back on the incident. You would think that he would have yelled at me to stop, get out of the car, or even just scream, but he didn't. In fact, the man never uttered a single word and didn't make any noise at all, except for the pounding on my window. The whole experience was horrifying, but that tiny piece of it was so bizarre. I never saw the car or that man again. But on my next work shift, I hugged Jay tight and thanked him profusely. Had he not insisted that I lock my passenger side door, then that man would have most definitely gotten inside. There's a city near where I grew up called Pleasant Grove, Utah, that's full of crazy stories. People from there tend to be strange, so it's not too far-fetched for me to believe it. There's a book entitled Jay's Journal about the true story of a depressed kid who gets involved in the occult. He was from there too. A kid ended himself in the high school auditorium, and it's now supposedly haunted. There's a big G on the mountains above the city where weird shit goes on like sacrifices, or so I heard back in high school. There was a lady in the news who had like 6 fetuses in jars in her garage. Yeah, she was from Pleasant Grove. There's just a lot of strange stuff going on there. But Jay's journal was the big one growing up. There was a house near where I lived that he supposedly did rituals in. It looked creepy as hell, and nobody ever lived in it. It was eventually bulldozed down, and a new business was built in its place. This happened to me when I was about 11 years old. It was in the 1990s. I have lived my whole life in El Paso, Texas. The culture is rich in folklore and religious beliefs. Many Hispanic families have stories of the paranormal. One popular legend is the legend of the Weeping Woman, aka La Llorona. The legend of La Llorona, pronounced La Llorona, Spanish for the Weeping Woman, has been a part of Hispanic culture in the Southwest since the days of the conquistadors. The tall, thin spirit is said to be blessed with natural beauty and long, flowing black hair. Wearing a white gown, she roams the rivers and creeks, wailing into the night and searching for children to drag, screaming to a watery grave. No one really knows when the legend of La Llorona began or from where it originated. Though the tales vary from source to source, the one common thread is that she is the spirit of a doomed mother who drowned her children and now spends eternity searching for them in rivers and lakes. One night, just like any other night, I lived in a trailer with my mom and dad. My youngest brother was staying with my aunt this night. I fell asleep watching Jay Leno as usual, and when I woke up, I was on the sofa in my living room. The time was 4 a.m., which illuminated the stove in the kitchen. The television was off, and normally I had a light on, but this time it was pitch black. I woke up, and I heard a horrible screaming that was coming from far in the distance. The screaming was coming from a ditch that was a few feet away from my home. I heard it, and I thought I was hearing things. I asked myself, am I dreaming? Then I started to hear the animals outside howling and whimpering. These animals that I speak of are cats and dogs. As the screaming got closer, the animals continued to cry. The screaming was something I had never experienced before. It sounded like I was in a big hallway, and a woman was screaming her guts out down that hallway. Then, in all the screaming, I started to make out words. These words being said by whoever this was at 4 a.m. screaming their guts out shocked me. The woman said, mis hijos. Oh, my children. In a huge panic, I quickly got up from the sofa and ran to the kitchen, which was right next to where I was asleep. I turned on the closest light and looked around. The screaming didn't stop. In fact, the screaming only got louder and closer. I questioned my sanity at that moment. Was I going crazy or hearing things? Then I thought to myself, this is real, and the animals are responding to it in a negative way. So I did what any other 11-year-old boy would do in a moment like this. I ran to my mom's and dad's room. I reached for my mom and shook her awake wildly. She woke up slowly, and to my amazement, the screaming faded away as she woke up. I thought to myself, what the heck is going on? I told my mother, Mom, do you hear that screaming and crying lady? My mom was half asleep as she said, go back to sleep, it is most likely just your imagination. I told her, no, this is real. Please listen. Don't you hear her? My mom quickly just said, you are dreaming, so go back to sleep, it's going to be okay. By then, the screaming had faded long ago, as if whoever was screaming knew that an adult was awake. I was terrified as I returned to the living room and quickly turned on the television, as I left most of the lights on as well. I didn't go back to sleep until the sun came up. I couldn't believe what I heard and witnessed. I was treated like a crazy person whenever I told my story. It got so bad that I kept my experience to myself. To this day, I don't care what people think of my experience. I know what I heard. A couple of years later, it happened to me again. This story takes place after the first incident with the woman known as La Llorona. Not much happened after the first time I heard her. An incident occurred with my aunt about a year after my encounter. According to my aunt, they were sleeping, and suddenly there was a horrible sound coming from the ditch located in front of their house. There is a street between the ditch and the house. But her house and the ditch are really close to one another. It was about 2:30 a.m. when my aunt was awakened by a screaming woman coming from a ditch. She figured maybe somebody was being hurt or attacked. She walked out to the front yard, looking towards the ditch, and saw there was no woman. My cousin, her daughter, walked out the front as well, asking what was happening. My aunt, of course, had no idea as the screaming grew closer. Then they saw her, a woman in a white dress. The only thing that shook them to the bone was that the woman had no feet and was clearly floating. One other feature that threw them off was that this woman had no face. They both just turned after seeing that and ran inside their house. My aunt locked the door and called the police. The police showed up minutes later and took their claims seriously. El Paso PD was soon looking at the area where this woman was seen and heard screaming. The police soon returned and said there was no evidence that a woman was there. They looked at the area where the woman was seen walking, and not even footprints were found. One of the police officers even asked if maybe my aunt was dreaming about everything that happened. The next day is when I went over to visit, and I saw my cousin like I had never seen her before. She had black bags under her eyes, and she hasn't slept since the incident. I asked her what happened, and she said she saw what my aunt saw. The screaming woman had no feet and no face. It took her a while to sleep normally again. She never heard or saw La Llorona again. But to this day, she won't deny that she witnessed something that she can't explain. Unlike my cousin, I don't have the luck of avoiding La Llorona. It was in the early 2000s when I worked here in El Paso, Texas, at a local supermarket named Big 8. One of the shifts that I worked was from 3 a.m. to 12 p.m. This store was located in the lower valley of El Paso. At the back of the store is a small ditch. One early morning, at about 4 a.m., I had the back doors open, and I was taking the empty milk crates outside in the back. I was working with two other guys at the time of this incident. One of the guys named or thought it would be funny to close the back doors and lock me outside as a joke. When I heard the doors close shut, I knew he was just messing around. I thought to myself that I would just stay quiet and wait for him to open the doors again. I wasn't going to give in to his joke about trying to scare me. I stood by the doors, smiling and thinking to myself, he is not going to scare me. I could hear her laughing on the other side of the doors. I thought to myself, well, the joke is on him because I am not scared. About 1 minute later, in the far distance, I heard screaming. I heard ah. And I thought to myself, it's the same screaming that I heard when I was 11 years old. The screaming got louder and closer to me. I felt a chill down my spine, and I felt that I was being watched by some unseen force. I felt a sense of hopelessness. It was a feeling unlike any other. I started pounding on the door. I yelled, "Let me in. There is somebody out here." I pounded my fists and started kicking the door. "What the duck? Let me in." I could hear her laughing on the other side of the door. I started to kick the door harder. The screaming was now coming from right in front of me. Just then, R opened the door and said, "What the duck is that?" Just then, I ran inside and locked the warehouse door. R said, "Why was that lady screaming? Did she need help?" I told him that I don't think that was a lady. I told him what had happened to me when I was younger. R told me, "Jay, don't you think maybe you are cursed or she is following you?" I stayed quiet when he told me that. I couldn't work my shift normally after that. It took a few hours to get over what happened. I admit I was scared, and maybe R was right. What if she was following me? There was one more incident that took place right after. In 2015, I started working as a custodian at Cedar Grove Elementary. Behind the school is the border highway. Then the Rio Grande, of course, is covered by a huge metal fence that separates Mexico from El Paso. I worked the night shift from 2:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. one night. I was stuck working with another custodian until midnight. Right when we were about to leave, we did a walkthrough of the school to make sure all the doors were locked on the outside. I worked with another custodian named C. C always told me that he had never believed in ghosts. Up until that night, I can say. We walked to our cars, and just as I was about to leave, I saw that C had opened the hood of his car. Then he asked me, "Hey, Jay, can you give me a jump? My car battery is dead." I told him yes, of course. Just as I stepped out of my car, a loud scream came from the Rio Grande. All the animals in the nearby neighborhood started howling and crying. Once again, the screaming resembled a woman screaming her guts out in a hallway as it echoed all over. C looked at me and said, "Oh my God, is that a demon?" I told him, "No, C, that is La Llorona." He looked right at me and said, "No way? She can't be real." Then I said, "I have heard her before." Then C said, "Hurry, please, and let's get out of here." I gave him a jump, and just then we saw a border patrol jeep speeding towards the screaming woman. Just then, I thought to myself, I can record this and share it with the world. I took my phone out, and just as I hit record, the screaming faded away. C and I looked at each other, and he said, "What the duck? Sorry Jay, I'm leaving before that evil witch comes back to get us." We both left, and the very next day, C was telling everybody at work how he heard the witch crying the night before. That was the last time I encountered her. I don't think it is the last, as I feel that she may choose who hears her or sees her. I have other paranormal stories, as I was a part of a group here in El Paso, Texas. We have investigated many historical locations. I also got the chance to investigate with Amy Bruni and other celebrities who have visited El Paso. That is a whole other story for another day.